Conservation Commission and Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Agency for Tuesday, April 1st, 2025 to order. We do have two positions to fill, so our alternates, Sue, if she's not here at the moment. All right, and Allison, if you could be seated for Joe. All right. Approval of the minutes for March 20th, 2025. Do we have any corrections or alterations to the minutes? Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. Moving on to item 4, designated agent actions and other reports, application CC number 2511 of Town of Simsbury, owner, engineering department applicant for a wetland permit to perform maintenance and repair work at Second Brook Culvert at Farmington Canal Heritage Trail, Simsbury.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is a designated agent approval for emergency maintenance work that the engineering and public works staff discovered was needed at the Second Brook Culvert at the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail. So the maintenance activity was on the inlet side of the culvert. They began hand clearing the overgrowth so that they could see the extent of the erosion. We have engineering staff here if there's any further questions. It's expected there will be some machine work and repairs once they know the full extent to it. And then they mentioned in their memo there's a plan for stabilization of the embankment as they work on that site. So any questions for me or staff?
Just curious, are there any invasives on that bank?
It looks like it, doesn't it?
It does.
Are there any invasives?
For the record, Adam Kessler with the engineering department. Yeah, there's probably some invasives. I think that's one of the good stands of
Japanese-
invasives along the trail.
Is that Japanese knotweed?
Probably.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Will there be a plan to try to address that?
We're going to try. Our first concern is the extensive erosion that's occurred over time. We don't think this is like a one-off, one storm occurred and suddenly the bank started to fail. Seems like it's over a long period of time. So what happened was behind the inlet, it's a stone culvert that basically dates back to when the railroad was installed. Some of the stones and mortar failed, and it created a void, and water found its way and started to erode back that embankment. So we'll try to address invasives as best we can while we're working in there. And we'll certainly take any recommendations, but I think we're going to try to keep our disturbance limited to the area that's needed.
Yeah, I just wondered if it is Japanese knotweed, they tend to undermine structures.
Right,
So
right. So we'll see what we can do.
Are you going to try to repair the stone culvert or? Okay.
Yeah, our hope is to be able to basically just kind of peel back some of the soil and overgrowth that's in the area and get a good look at the condition of it, and whether we have to kind of build up the inlet with block and kind of create a new inlet, or if we can actually reconstruct that stone culvert in that area, we will. The good news is the rest of the culvert from basically that point down is in good condition. We still see daylight through it. So we believe the rest of it's in good condition, and we can just address the inlet.
How big is the culvert?
It's,
Big?
it's
What is supposed to be?
it looks like it's about, it's kind of a stone arch. So the base, it's, not more than 30 inches, 36 inches
Okay,
wide.
so
It's not that big, all things considered. Yeah. And we'll just, rebuild it to the way it is today. It was a big relief for us that we didn't have to chase the failure into that bank. But, one of the unfortunate things is we do own the culverts that are under the trail, since we put a trail on top of the railroad. So after this failure, we will be inspecting other culverts in the upcoming year, just to be sure.
How does it find?
We had a resident that called in with some concerns about basically ponding water back there. So we went in and, just kind of walked in, kind of took a look at it, and you could even tell before we removed vegetation that there was failure in the slope, that something was occurring. The slope just wasn't consistent through that area, and it's dead straight through that area. So DPW came in, I think the next day, hand cleared, it's pretty quick work of it, and we got a better look at what was happening. And then at that point, knowing that everything was fairly stable, we decided to wait for a drier period so that we're not mucking around as much as we need to.
Any other questions? All right. So we'll move on to the second item, the engineering update on Terriffill pickleball courts.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure the Conservation Commission and Wetlands had a chance to know about this project and the resurfacing that's going on at the tennis courts, which will then be pickleball courts at Terriffill Park. So Adam's here to answer any questions. It's considered an unregulated, it's close proximity but unregulated activity because of the nature of the use. But again, we wanted to make sure that we presented it for the commission.
So again, for the record, Adam Kessler.
Adam, I know
Yeah.
you're tall, but if you could get into the mic.
little
it's
bit.
hard picking up in the back.
And somebody's
I
got
know,
to
I'm
adjust it
gonna- I'm
later.
gonna be a little
That's
bit of a
fine.
scold all night with everybody on your microphone, so.
Fair
please,
enough.
you're
Fair
asking
enough.
questions, before you questions, please get in front of the mic. Thanks.
For the record, Adam Kessler with the Engineering Department again. So this is strictly a kind of a rehab of the existing court. We're working within the limits of the fence line. Essentially, we'll remove the fence fabric, have a contractor come in, remove the existing pavement, supplement the base, and then repave it. So there won't be any disturbance to any surrounding soils or the soil underneath the courts. And we view this strictly as a maintenance item that's typical of asphalt courts, that every, let's say 10 to 15 years, you do need to redo the asphalt. The cracks just get simply too big. Because of the desire to have pickleball, they'll simply be recoated and striped for pickleball instead of tennis. So because we're staying within the confines, we felt that this was just maintenance. And we're happy to answer any questions you might have about it.
It's the same surface.
Yeah, it's the same surface you see on typical pickleball or tennis courts. Nothing special. It's just a three-coat epoxy type of coating system that it gets applied.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 5, new applications for receipt and determination of significance. Application CC number 25-08 of Mary and Robert Huckvale, applicant and owner for a wetland permit to construct a 20 by 25-foot addition at the rear of their home and wetland soils at 48 Pine Glen Road, Assessors Map D17, Block 204, Lot 017, Zone R40.
Yes, so this is CC number 2508, 48 Pine Glen Road. It is for receipt. It is a 20 by 25 addition in the rear home, proposed in wetland soils. We've had a few of these actually lately. The house was built in 1988. The current porch, as you can see from the pictures, about 16 feet by 16 feet. So that addition will replace that. It'll be a 2-floor addition. The addition has a foundation, and silt fencing is proposed as on the plan. I didn't know if the applicant was here, the owner or the applicant. Oh. If there's any questions about it.
Hello. My name is Peter Hinman. This is my son Christian Hinman. We're functioning as the builders and the contractors. This is Robert and Mary Huck Valley, right?
The microphone.
Oh, sorry about that. Did you get any of that? Good enough, or you want to repeat?
You're good, keep going.
Keep going.
Okay. Any questions you want me to answer? Can I do a quick description,
Yes, please.
if you'd like?
Yes, please.
Okay, so you can see, I don't know if you saw that, you have that drawing. Did you get copies of the drawing that's showing a kind of an aerial view of the, did you receive that, or can I have several copies I can show you? Should I do that?
Nope, you're good.
They
I'm
received
good.
it. They received it.
Okay,
They got it
okay.
at their desktop.
Sure. So, again, it's a two-story addition. It's 20 by 25. The 20-foot span is what's coming up and making contact with the main house, and it's 25 feet out towards the rear of the property. Structurally, it's going to have it has a common roof system, a gutter system. It's going to have a full basement. The full basement elevation is going to be really just tying in and blending with the existing footing system, as well as the slab in the basement is going to be at the same elevation as the existing house. The footing drain system that's on the existing house is really just going to continue around that new structure. Procedurally, what we do is inside the footing, the full 10-inch depth of the footing is completely filled with stone and perforated pipe. That system exits through the footing and then enters into the same system outside of the footing, where it's all going to be stone perforated pipe tying into the existing footing drain, and then all exits into that deep culvert in the backyard. You can't see that culvert from here, but it's very close, like that, where that evergreen is there. It's just inside of that evergreen that culvert travels parallel to the back of the house, quite deep. And that existing footing drain system ties into that. It dumps into that. So does the neighbor's property, does the same thing. Same footing drain system on there is dropping that water into that deep culvert. The gutter system that's going to be on the addition is going to be, it's a separate system in that, we don't integrate the water from a gutter system because it's contaminated into a footing drain system, just so it doesn't clog up anything. So that system, you can see that gutter on the main house, right on that left-hand photo right on the right-hand side. You can see that tall vertical leader coming down that secures into a drain. That drain travels kind of more diagonally because there's also an additional deep culvert that travels parallel to the driveway. There's two culverts there. The main culvert, I think, all the way across the back, and all that water is traveling. Is that south? Is the direction of that south? And then there's a perpendicular culvert that travels down the side of the driveway and intersects. And I think that gutter system was going to be tied into that in order to, again, and then the whole project will be obviously going to be completely protected and surrounded with silt fence. And
Okay, we're having trouble bringing up the application on our thing. So just for clarification, that addition and the silt fencing is preventing the erosion from going down towards that water course? Yeah, and the tree line is where, the water course is in the tree line? Yeah, okay.
just on the other side of that tree
Okay.
line, yeah.
Can't see the house in that sketch.
So this is in the wetland soils?
I'll let her answer that.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
yes.
Do we know if it
Yes.
was filled when the house was constructed? I'm just trying to,
If it was what?
filled,
What do you
Like-
mean?
filled in with topsoil? Just trying to get an idea of what's gonna be excavated. out.
Right, I don't know the answer to that.
What's
This-
going to happen with the excavated earth
Yeah.
removed? Yeah, for the most part, there'd be a little bit, just to really kind of finesse the contour, once the excavation is done. You can see that there's an existing patio, small patio there on this side of that screened-in porch. That's going to be removed, by the way. The screened-in porch is gone, and this is what's taking the place of that. So there's going to be a, just, there's going to be a patio there that's incorporated into this. So there's going to be a portion of that side property along the side of the building that obviously will be maintained level. Then when it gets out to approximately the end of the structure, there'll be a small retaining wall in order to maintain that level of the patio. And then it'll just continue from that point on. The existing grade will stay just like it is. You follow that? Yeah.
Right. And that little, gray area at the bottom, that's where at the middle picture, that little gray area at the bottom, that's part of the culvert or the?
So it's
Or-
the corner of your driveway.
Corner of the driveway, okay, good.
Yeah, I think so,
good, good.
yeah.
All right.
Is the porch right now just on pilings, like
It's on piers, yeah.
on piers, just concrete?
Yeah, they'll be gone. That's gone. This is going to be a full foundation, you know, just really going to be exactly what's on the main house.
But it's going to be, it's going to basically be a pad, or it's going to be a pad, or you're going to actually dig down for a full foundation?
Full foundation, blending in exactly with the existing house.
Okay, so how far deep are you going?
There's quite a bit of exposed concrete there.
Yep.
But it'll be down, probably maybe about 5 feet below what you have, what's existing. That will tie into the existing, depth of the footing that's there on the main house.
Will that foundation require a sump pump?
I'm sorry.
Will it require a sump pump?
No.
Not in that
No,
area?
it's all going to be gravity fed. There's no
Okay.
need for a sump pump. No.
Okay, good.
So you said the main house has a perimeter drain
Yes,
right now?
it does, yeah.
Okay, and that just drains into that
Right into a deep culvert in the back, yeah.
culvert in the
Yeah,
back?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just a question about lawn maintenance. Any fertilization going on in that lawn that will drain down into the?
Well, yeah, I mean, when it's fully completed, you know, the excavation is going to create some disturbed soil there. So the whole thing will end up being really just top dressed and seeded.
Okay.
Fertilization really
Yeah.
wouldn't have to, I don't think. It's just
Okay,
going to
'cause
be.
anything on that lawn will drain directly into the wetlands.
Yes,
Yes,
that's right.
yeah, so we would
Any
encourage.
service
yeah,
water is
all
going to go right into that.
So we can
Yep.
discuss that at the next meeting. All right,
You can make a finding of significance.
yes, yeah, was just curious. So would you like to make a finding of significance? Or unless there are more questions?
I just had sort of a procedural question.
Yeah.
This is a lot of work in the upland review area in the wetland soil, more than we typically have. I mean, it's a lot of construction.
Right.
But typically, we have findings of significance only when we think it has a public, a public hearing part.
Right. So these are tricky because these are houses that were built in wetland soils. We have a couple of them in town, a few neighborhoods in town. So you have to determine the extent of the work, and if it warrants, a public hearing, or if it's a non-significant, and they would come to the next meeting.
Okay, so even though there's a lot of, construction here that we'd have to sort of take a look at the details to make sure it's working the way we expect, it could still be a not significant activity because it's not, there's not a public need for a review.
Right.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we find that this activity is not significant and we adjudicate it at our next scheduled meeting.
Second,
Any further discussion? All in favor?
aye.
Aye. All right.
Would this be on the 17th or our meeting in May?
We have to make sure the meeting is going to be on the 17th
Okay.
with the other application that will go forward. But I will let the applicants know
Okay.
when it will be.
All right. All right.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. All right, the next item, item 6, discussion and an action on applications. Applicant CC number 25-06, Lynn Bossart, owner, and James Mattingly, applicant for a wetland permit to construct a 16 by 9-foot deck in the wetland soil at 26 Southbridge Court, Assessors Map E11, Block 150, Lot 001B.
Yes, so this was heard at the last meeting. It was determined non-significant. The applicant could not be here tonight, but it's a pretty minor deck project as they're using helical piers, which create minimal disturbance in the soils, and then the silt fencing will be placed as part of the plan. There is a motion at your table as well, if
Is there any, do we have any other further questions? I'd entertain the motion.
I'll motion that we approve the application, subject to the standard conditions and any special conditions in the staff report that may be there.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. All right, now, on to public hearing for application CC number 25-02, McLean Affiliates, Inc., applicant and owner for a wetland permit to construct 52 new residential units of the existing McLean Retirement Community with associated improvements in the wetland soils and upland review area at 75 Great Pond Road, Assessors Map E08, Block 147, Lot 001. And this is a continuation of the public hearing from February 18th and the March 20th meeting. So just to let you know what we'll be doing, we will have introductions by the staff, and then we have some questions for the applicant. We will follow it by the applicant and interveners. We have applicant presentation of new information in response to the intervener submissions. Next, we'll have intervener presentation of new information in response to the applicant's submissions. Then we'll have applicant rebuttal if it's necessary, additional commissioner questions, and public comments. So that's the order of things, and we do have some questions that we did want to ask at the beginning. So we're going to take turns asking these questions, and I think are you going to be putting them up on? Okay. Oh, staff first. Sorry, that's my.
Now,
got it right here.
you've heard from staff four
Yes.
times on this application. We don't have any particular introduction other than to introduce ourselves. George McGregor, Planning Director. Brittany McGilpin, Assistant Town Planner. So the commission suggested some 5 questions to begin the evening as opposed to waiting for the applicant. They're kind of threshold questions, several to the applicant, several to the intervener, in terms of just kind of working through what are threshold, big picture questions about the application and about the project. So I would defer back to you.
Thank you.
So I would, I would just call whoever you're asking the question of. I think 1 or 2 of the questions are for both the applicant and the intervener. So I'll defer back to you.
All right, thank you.
So quick question, are we expecting a response to the questions, or we're just basically reading them out and then they'll respond as part of their presentation?
I think you should expect the applicant and/or the intervener to answer the question at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And both will be getting copies of these questions, yes. All right, so the first question is for the applicant and the intervener. Is the soil and erosion control plan sufficient for the terrain and scope of the project site to protect the wetlands during construction? If not, please state the reasons why and cite specific areas of concern on the project site where the wetlands will be adversely impacted.
Second question.
I would get the answer now. I would work through them again. These are going to help form questions later as you
So we'll
begin to
just have
think
them-
about how to discuss.
Okay.
So as opposed to waiting for the applicant or the intervener to get into their presentations, which might be an hour and a half from now. These are important questions that the commission has identified. So I would ask the applicant to come up first and answer this question, and
Thank
then
you.
the intervener can come up and answer this question.
All right, now we've got it. Okay, thank you.
And the question's right in front of them, so you don't have to
There you go.
repeat
Thank
it.
you. All right.
Okay, great. Good evening. For the record, my name is Ryan McAvoy. I'm a licensed professional engineer on behalf of SLR. here with, on behalf of the applicant, excuse me, and I'm pinch hitting for Tom Daly, who appeared before you at the last public hearings. He's at a conference in Houston. So with regard to our sediment erosion control plan, we do believe that it's adequate. One thing I'd point out about this site is that the topography, existing topography of the land is relatively gentle to moderately sloping, with almost the entirety of the site at or below 10% in grade, with only some isolated areas that get up to 15% in grade. So you're not dealing with a site that has excessively steep slopes at the present condition. So that is one positive element of the site that just bodes well for controlling sediment erosion control during construction. The second, of course, is our plan itself. So our plan is designed in accordance with the 2024 DEP Soil Erosion and Sediment Control Guidance Document, which includes protection of wetland areas with silt fence, hay bales where appropriate, and also directing construction areas, disturbed areas into temporary sediment traps during construction. So these elements, along with appropriate site planning and phasing, will result in the minimization of disturbance of the site, and also protection of wetland resources, which is our primary goal. Of course, also offsite areas that maybe aren't wetlands that would certainly be a consideration for soil erosion and sediment control. So we believe, in our professional opinion, that this site meets the goals of both the town of Simsbury regulations and the state requirements in the guidance document. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have anyone from the interveners here to?
Steve Trinkus, professional engineer representing the interveners. As the applicant submitted revised stuff yesterday, I had about an hour this afternoon to look at it, so not really enough time. Some of the issues I raised last time was they showed sediment basins, but there were no grading to them. So how does a contractor know how to build them? Contractors are notorious for, if you tell them to dig a hole, they'll dig the smallest hole they think is needed, not necessarily what the design engineer wants. The applicant's response was that these will be done as part of the Connecticut general permit. I will submit that that's incorrect. They have to be done at this time when they're in front of the regulatory agencies, because you guys need to see that information to make sure it works properly. They supposedly, based on the response to my initial comments, did revise some stuff on the erosion plan. But again, I have not had a chance to look at it. I will say that hay bales need to go to the dump and stay in the dump. Hay bales are the most useless erosion control measure out there now. One, they never get put in the right way. They're supposed to be in a trench. They're supposed to be tightly butted together. And that never happens. And sometimes you can put your hand between two hay bales. Silt fence also should be regulated to a dump pile because there's better products out there. Silt fence will trap coarse sediment in stormwater, but stuff that's in suspension, turbidity, passes right through a silt fence. So the coffee-colored water goes right on through. Some of the better products are Filtrex socks and some of the other compost logs. They come up to 18, 20-inch diameter, so they're pretty hefty. And they follow the ground contours. They don't have to be set into the ground, and it's much more effective. But silt fence and hay bales do not protect down gradient areas from turbidity and stormwater. Dirty water will pass through both of those systems. So if the hearing is continued to allow time to review stuff, I may have additional comments, but I do not feel that the plan was adequate in my initial review, and I still have that opinion.
Thank you.
So it sounds to me like your summary is that the execution of this plan is one of the big questions in your mind right now. How it would be executed.
Yeah, execution of erosion control plans is one of the biggest problems out there, especially on a project of this magnitude. The applicant in their response says they provided a phasing plan. I have not seen that yet. The way you control your site is to limit the area of disturbance at one time, and that way, and stabilize it before moving on to the next section. That's the best way to prevent problems on a site.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next. Oh,
Yeah, we have to hear from the soil scientist too. Hi, George Logan. A couple of things. I agree with what Mr. Trinko said. We're sort of in the elementary stages of saying that this is a good plan as far as erosion sedimentation control. The other thing you need to consider is that the predominant soils here have a texture of sill loam. So there's a lot of silt and fines that are associated with it. And the other thing you might be interested to see is that you're butting on two sides of basically a watercourse system, which goes right into the Hop River. So the chances of getting silt through the watercourse to the watercourse and then to the Hop River are quite high. Thank you.
thank you.
Hello. For the record, my name is Megan Raymond. I'm a professional soil scientist, registered soil scientist, professional wetland scientist, and certified floodplain manager with SLR. I felt I should stand up as a soil scientist given the intervener's approach, although Mr. McAvoy of our company, professional engineer, satisfied the answer, I believe, technically. But I'd like to add to that looking at the logs, the boring logs that we have of the soil on the site, the predominant soil type that we have on the property where we're working in is predominantly sandy, and the sedimentation and erosion control is adequate as designed to prevent temporary impacts to wetlands and watercourses during construction. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question.
Second question is for the applicant and the intervener. The statutes state that wetlands and watercourses, including habitats in which an organism or population normally lives or occurs. Further case law suggests protections of the soils are permissible when a negative impact on wildlife might have a negative consequential effect on the physical characteristics of the wetland. The question is, do we as the commission have the jurisdiction to regulate activities which may have a negative consequential effect on wildlife, such as the box turtle? How would the effects on the box turtle or other wildlife species likely impact or affect the physical characteristics of the wetland? And what's the evidence backing any claims up?
Good evening. For the record, my name is Megan Raymond, professional wetland scientist, registered soil scientist with SLR. This is definitely a question that deserves some thought, and I'm glad that you brought it up. From a holistic point of view, the position of the commission, and this is through case law, has been stated, or the overall guiding principle is that commissions are not to regulate wildlife outside a wetland area unless those activities that are proposed would affect the physical characteristics of the wetland. And in this particular case, when we look at a species such as the box turtle, we have an organism, a reptile that is not a strictly wetland-dependent animal. It is not a finfish or a wood frog that requires 100% on a wetland for its life cycle characteristics. And in that regard, the position would be that this commission does not have ultimate jurisdiction over a species such as the box turtle. But I'd like to caveat that and add a little bit more context, which is that it's incredibly important for a commission to understand the functions and values of the wetlands that projects are located within. And in this particular case, we have a project that works, that is focused in an area of a 112-acre site in a work area that has about 1.85 acres of wetlands. About 10% of the wetlands on the site are located within where we're working. We have gone through lengths, and actually to great benefit of this public discourse, where the site plan has been refined and impacts have been reduced at each iteration. And we're at the point now where we have a plan that greatly has diminished work within the upland review and within the wetland areas to 3,400 square feet total. And that's required for access, for crossings. And that's been understood to be an area that is permissible when in wetlands. Wetland crossings are generally acceptable, provided they're proposed correctly. So what I'd like to state is that though there is work within these wetland areas, the wetlands where we're focused on the physical impact, or actual physical impacts of the of the work, those particular areas of the wetlands, the larger wetlands will remain. And we still are seeing on the site a habitat mosaic that supports all of the life cycle attributes of the eastern box turtle. Though I am a wetland scientist, McLean has actually hired and has on contract through the McLean Game Refuge, state leading herpetologist, he's not doctor, but Dennis Quinn, who is going to be leading the site efforts as it relates to the eastern box turtle, ensuring appropriate measures to protect the species during construction. But that's over and above, I think, that just shows what great stewards of the land McLean is, and all of the life cycle attributes that we're seeing within the property in terms of as specific to the box turtle will remain. And I'm happy to ask, this is a question we could actually speak about all night. So I'll just stand and just know that I'm here for further questions as they come up, unless you have a redirect.
I just had a question. Would the timing of construction impact the box turtle?
So how that generally is, that's dependent upon and this will be coordinated with Dennis Quinn, but it depends upon the sequence of construction in specific habitats. For example, the meadow area is not an area that the turtle would overwinter. It would overwinter in an area such as a woodland edge. So if you were to focus on work within the meadow during the winter time, certain activities could take place. But generally what you want to do is set up confinement, and the confinement is based upon the habitat type and the timing of the construction seasonally. So we've had projects where we set up confinement to prevent work, or we don't allow contractors to come in woodland areas during the winter. And then we would set up a perimeter fence to establish sweeps during the active season. And actually DEEP has a window for actually completing eastern box turtle sweeps, and that's April 1st to starting today through November 1st. And so there's a rule of thumb that you do want to, if you know turtles are there, you'd like to work when they are active, provided that your work area is confined and secure. But we go through lengths, I mean, even as SLR, but you have a very experienced herpetologist, or we do in advising here. But in addition, in combination with that, there's a lot of contractor awareness. There's mandates with sheets, what to do if you find something. There's a project meeting every morning. And again, there's exhaustive sweeps, but any construction would be monitored by these individuals that would ensure that the protocols, and I would like to also mention that this box turtle is a special concern species of the state, and it's something that, though it is certainly something that we're focused on, there are specific protocols that have been established by the state to minimize protections, particularly during construction, and that would be followed here. And so again, thank you.
Sigrun Gadwa, an ecologist for REMA. I think I introduced myself last time. With regard to the wetland status of box turtles, there actually is considerable variation over the species range. In many places, especially the Midwest, they typically hibernate in sandy upland areas, quite deep. But in Connecticut, my finding, I found a couple of hibernating box turtles at the edges of wetland seeps, actually in jurisdictional wetlands. They hibernate in moist, soft, deep soil in saturated wetlands. And I talked with Dr. Clemens about this, and he too has found this to be the case in the glaciated Northeast, both in New York State and Connecticut. So there, if you look at the photos in Jess Frank's packet that she provided you, you'll see one turtle, I forget its number, with a muddy shell. And if you look at the locations of that on the plot map, you'll see that it's coming out of wetland 8. I'm sure that it was hibernating in the soft, deep saturated soil in wetland 8. And also, it just so happens that box turtles forage on fruits and snails and on herbaceous vegetation, the understory. And typically the lush understory that has both the invertebrates and the leaf litter and the fruits it's in the seasonally saturated wetlands and in wetland habitats. Wetland 8 the edges of wetlands 5 and 7 as well are ideal foraging habitats for the eastern box turtle, more so than the somewhat drier outside parts. And they do need to bask on and in open areas. They'll really use the woods, the field edges for basking, and for travel they'll move along the trails that people have made in that, and they of course nest in the open field. But they move back and forth between the wetlands and the open field. And as you can see in the plot map where they've been located, they're mostly in the lower open field, which is the one that's going to be mostly developed, not in the upper one. They move between that developed area back to the wetland and back. And in Connecticut, I would, as a professional, I'm convinced that a eastern box turtle is a wetland-dependent species based on where I found them, the many times that I have encountered them over my 25 years, and where a lot of people, I do the citizen monitoring, so I learn where other people have found them too. The habitats. That I want to say that I actually communicated with Dennis Quinn on Thursday, just a couple of days ago. He'd never heard of this population. I think he's on retainer with SLR. If their box turtles come up, they'll contact him. He's never been on the site. He didn't have any knowledge of the population 4 days ago.
So this is probably one of the, George Logan for the record, one of the, should we say, most argued questions as to whether or not a wetlands commission should regulate wildlife. I was the one who was probably mostly in fault, in a sense, for that being a question, because I was involved with the Avalon Bay versus Conservation Wilton Conservation Commission, and with the preserve case, and with the whole couple of others. We won't go into it. So here's the question that I have. If you have, one of the things that the preserve case said is that if the diminution or the elimination of a particular wildlife species or suite of wildlife species is large enough that it has a chemical, physical impact on the wetland itself, then that's regulated. The thing that they had in the preserve case, they talked, and this is the old Saybrook, Westbrook, and Essex 1,000-acre piece that is now in conservation, thank God. So if you have a vernal pool, and that was the question that was there, and you eliminate or significantly diminish the wood frog population, you have a chemical change to the actual vernal pool itself. So here's the thing. If we were talking about one box turtle or two box turtles on the site, okay, I would say there's not much of a significant impact that the diminution or elimination of a turtle population would have from a wetland. But in this particular case, we have a robust population, and they use this wetland a lot in what we are seeing from the data that has arrived. So I would say then the question is, maybe in this particular case, because you have a robust population, they will, in my mind, blink out because of the fragmentation that's being proposed here. And we can go more into that if you like, but I'll just try to answer this question, is because of that, or the number of turtles that we have here, that this would, in essence, constitute an impact, a physical impact upon the nutrient cycling and just the chemistry of the wetland itself. Remember, one of the things that turtles do, they come in and they they eat what they find, and then they distribute those findings through their digestive system. And so they were able to populate flora in other portions of the wetland. And in a sense, they keep the wetland robust, especially that central section of wetland 8. That's probably not going to be happening if the turtle population blinks out.
Just one sentence I should have mentioned. Seed dispersal by box turtles is very important. And George just basically said that at the end. But that the composition of the plant community, whether the native wildflowers that have juicy seeds like the doll's eyes and blackberries, raspberries, whether those are dispersed, influences the community, the makeup of the structure of the vegetation, which is physical.
So I have a clarifying question on that. At the jurisdiction level, is it a correct interpretation of what you were saying is that if there is a finding that either changing the wildlife would have an impact on the resulting area, or changing the area would have a resulting significant impact on the wildlife,
Yeah.
then we would have jurisdiction?
Yes.
That's a summary of what you believe?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the third question is for the applicant. Please walk the commission through your review and consideration of feasible and prudent alternatives. What design options, if any, were considered to reconfigure the development in a way that would cause less or no environmental impact on the wetland soils? Could the wetlands be spanned by a bridge? Could the design be limited to one crossing? Could units be removed, replaced, or altered to reduce impacts? If there are, could you list the alternative designs that you considered and then dismissed, and one of the reasons for them?
Good evening, Megan Raymond, professional wetland scientist with SLR. And we actually have this in our PowerPoint slide. I don't know if it's easy enough to pull that up. I think I have it stapled, the same slide stapled in my report here, but I just need to find it. But essentially, there were a number of alternatives considered specific to the crossings. Yes, it's the table, exactly. Thanks, Brittany.
So while that's coming up, you're saying that it's the same, that the answer is the same as what was in the revised plan?
Well, we tabulated, and there's a short discussion of this also in our impact assessment. But whenever we're sitting and we're looking at feasible and prudent alternatives, we focus on areas of direct wetland impact. And in this particular case, we began looking at the opportunity. If you look at what my colleague Matthew Sanford was kind enough to step in for me the last hearing, and a colleague actually before that too, so it's my first evening with you. Nice to see you. But he went through great, very specific detail as to how the crossings were laid out and what we look at as scientists working with our engineers and the design team. And we have a system here in Wetland 8 that has, in the areas where we're crossing, it's a very narrow part of the wetland, not an area, and it's an area that we could achieve a crossing. Beginning with, we look at the geometry of what we want to do, and then we focus in on the wetland characteristics and lay in potential options from an engineering perspective. So we first began to look at, thank you very much, Brittany. We first began to look at the potential to use a pipe. If you remember the hydrologic characteristics of the wetland, the ephemeral conditions of surface water, we actually could achieve a pipe culverts here, and we had our engineer look at that layout, and with the watersheds and with so forth, and passing a 100-year storm per your town standards, We actually could have just used a 24-inch pipe or a 30-inch pipe to provide the hydrologic flow and hydraulic characteristics of that flow to maintain consistency with your standards. But we didn't like the way that it looked. We wanted to give a little bit broader reach. We wanted to have more functionality within the box culvert itself or within the crossing itself. So we began to look at options specific to what could be achieved with a culvert. And we looked at just a generalized oversized box culvert that was just sitting in the ground, just a four-sided box, but without any habitat treatments, without a wildlife shelf, without any natural redistribution of surface material to mimic the existing forest floor. So we discounted just a standardized box, and we wanted to add in more habitat elements. So what's shaded in green is our preferred alternative that has just the considerations, which the time for construction, because again, it's important to understand it's feasible and prudent. So economics and time to construction and other things do come into play as opposed to solely functionality, although that is a strong determinant. So we did land on this box culvert with a natural invert because it did satisfy the purpose, providing those habitat elements as well as an oversized nature. Right now we have an openness ratio. It's a 6:3. We have an openness ratio of about 0.39 on each crossing, and that's because of the length of the crossing. The width is about 47 linear feet. So openness is just basically the area of the crossing, so height times width of the box, but then it's divided by the length. And so we're at about a little less than 4. There are standards for surface flow, like surface water for small aquatic mammals like mink and things that are actually in a riverine environment that have openness ratios designated. We're not in those types of systems here. We're in an ephemeral drainage corridor that doesn't even have, in the location where we're crossing, a true channel. At times it's channelized, but it's a very, it's an intermittent expression of surface water here, and it discharges in an ephemeral way. We did look at an opportunity to span the crossing entirely, but there is still, the cost is considerably higher, the time for construction is considerably longer. You have a great deal of impacts with excavation for the footings, and then you still need to allow for impacts within the wetland corridor itself for the utility crossings. So it didn't save you any impact area. So those were the criteria that we looked at when we evaluated the layout of the actual crossings themselves. As it gets into the design, I'll begin this, and if others on the team want to step in. There were a couple of different options laid out with the design. We looked at the potential to do a cul-de-sac with just one crossing, with 2 roads coming down and just one crossing on the cul-de-sac. But the cul-de-sac was 1,300 linear feet long, and it exceeded your the consistency with subdivision regulations and your overall rules in town. It didn't obviate the need for a secondary crossing or secondary work in that lower wetland impact area because of the utility needs. And let's also remember that lower, the southern crossing is an area that has an existing cart path on it. So we're just repositioning and utilizing that area for our work as well, not duplicating efforts, creating new cuts. We're using an opening that does exist now. So for all of those reasons, we landed on what we have today, which is site circulation, maintenance of wetland function, really minimizing. If you look back at our plan with the town guidance and input from the public, we've really reduced all work on the site within your jurisdiction to areas of impact specific to these roads, or this road and the 2 crossings, and then some grading as it relates to stormwater. There's very little impervious in jurisdictional areas. And we've minimized those efforts going through processes such as this, looking for the preferred alternative that does minimize the impacts, that maximizes or maintains the project purpose. And thank you. I'm happy to turn it to Ryan. Thank you.
Just one thing to add, and Megan alluded to it. With regard to the areas in the southern portion of the property, we have 22 dwelling units shown, and again, Megan mentioned that typically we look at guidance for town expectations with regard to access and with regard to number of dwelling units or distance of a cul-de-sac, for example. While this is not a subdivision application, of course, we do give that due consideration. And in this particular case, providing one crossing instead of two would have represented a potential safety risk for the residents that would live on the south side with only one means of entrance and exit into the site from the main campus. So we felt that one sole entrance would have been inappropriate in this particular case, given the number of units that we're proposing. Thank you.
So a clarifying question, or just, it sounds to me like the summary statement here is that all the alternatives that you've considered are all listed in this report. There was nothing new to add. So this is most of
Correct.
the alternatives. Thank you.
Correct. And we also, as this project has evolved, we've arrived at an alternative in and of itself from what was previously proposed and the modifications we've made along the way.
I also have a question. Was a bottomless culvert considered? Sort of just the.
The benefit of a open bottom culvert as compared to a closed bottom culvert where we're trying to reestablish the natural substrate within the culvert itself was we thought that the excavation needed to construct footings, which would be rather deep, 3-4 feet into the ground, as opposed to just a foot or a little bit over a foot for the stone base material beneath the culvert, really didn't have any positive impact as compared to a closed box culvert with reestablishing the natural substrate at the bottom of the culvert itself. So it would be a reasonable method to construct the crossing, but we just thought that may end up having more impact than the closed culvert.
So when you do the foundation for the culvert, you're gonna dig down a few feet and put in like
A stone base.
like
yeah.
process?
Correct. Yep.
What about the foundation for the retaining walls for that? They're
We're-
on either side of the culvert.
We're proposing a modular block retaining wall with a geogrid reinforcement that does not have substantially deep foundations or footings like you would have with perhaps a precast or cast-in-place concrete wall. So generally speaking, you don't go as deep with a modular block retaining wall as you would with a
When
concrete
you say
wall.
not as deep, what are we talking?
About a foot or two.
For the wall, so it only goes in a foot?
Foot and a half with when you consider the stone base beneath the wall itself.
So
So
it's gonna be basically sitting on the ground,
a little just below grade, yes.
but there's no process, there's no crushed gravel? It's
There
just-
there is, yes. So you do have a 6-inch crushed stone base, and then the modular wall sits on top of that. But it doesn't have the deep footing construction with the toe heel wall of a precast wall.
And that's gonna be good for frost? And
Yes. Oh, yes.
So it's
So
not gonna be disturbed by frost heaves,
No.
like lateral movement or vertical?
No, these are all structurally designed with those parameters in consideration.
And it will work in the silt loam, the wetland soils.
Yeah, so the soil conditions, would be more of a consideration for a precast structure that doesn't have that geogrid reinforcement behind it. So the weight of the wall itself, along with the geogrid reinforcement, give it the structural stability that it requires.
So to cross the both crossings,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna have to excavate basically from bank to bank, the 47 feet. So you're gonna rip that soil out and then put in crushed.
For the box
rocks-
culvert, yes.
Crushed rocks
Yep,
for that whole 47-foot span.
that's correct, yes.
Okay.
For underneath the box culvert, yes.
And for the walls, so you're gonna have to dig.
Along the edge of the road itself, yes. So the wall footing, the
So there'll
toe of the
be-
wall.
So there'll be 2 trenches for the walls.
Correct.
that You're gonna have to excavate down.
Yes,
And then in the middle will be another big.
Perpendicular.
A big excavation
for the box
for
culvert.
the box culvert. And
Madam Chair,
one more question. How far, I know there's 2 crossings, but do you know how far down that glacial till is from the bottom of the process?
In the vicinity of this, we have quite a bit of testing on site, but in the vicinity of these crossings, you tend to have glacial till anywhere from 3 to 6 feet below grade. So that generally speaking, we don't expect that these footings would sit in the glacial till, but if they did, that would be an acceptable design for the wall and for the bottom of the culvert.
And I see that that question was just for the applicant. Is that what you were? All right, the next question is for the intervener.
The next question's for the intervener. The Trinkus testimony suggests that the applicant's stormwater management plan is not consistent with the DEP guidelines and that the plan will adversely affect the wetlands in Hopbrook. Summarize to the commission the specific evidence that there will be an adverse impact or at least a reasonable likelihood of an adverse impact to the wetlands. In this answer, please include, will the stormwater management plan, if constructed properly, have a negative effect on wetlands, or only if it fails or is constructed improperly?
Steve Trinkus representing the interveners. Yes, the plan that I reviewed, including the modifications made today, the stormwater treatment aspect of it is deep sump catch basins, an online hydrodynamic separator, and now we have what the DEP manual calls as a dry extended detention basin, also known as simply a dry basin. Per the manual, which again is also a guidance document. It is not a cast in concrete, it's not regulated, it's not a regulation. But dry detention basins do a very poor job, and actually they're rated as low by the DEP manual for the reduction of many non-point source pollutants. A deep sump catch basin will remove about 9% of total suspended solids. Maybe you get a little reduction in metals and hydrocarbons. I think it was in my initial letter. Doesn't do anything for nutrients. Online separators will remove about 28% of total suspended solids. Again, some metals and hydrocarbons, but nutrients, again, pass right on through these systems. So, the applicant in their response to me said, well, I haven't provided evidence of the increased pollutant loads or impacts to the wetlands. I will submit, having done land use for 40 years, it is the burden of the applicant to prove that my design will not have an adverse impact on the wetlands. It's not the responsibility of a town engineer or a third-party person like myself to tell you, that here's the calculations. I can easily do that. But if you take 9%, and you take 29% for an online separator based on field monitoring data, you're at 37%. The DEP goal is 90% reduction of TSS. So they're not even halfway to that one. DEP also has reductions of nitrogen and phosphorus. This system basically will not remove any of that. They also claimed in their response that the original basins were not infiltration basins, which begs my question is, why did you include infiltration rates if they're not infiltration basins in that regard? But this design, as modified based on what was submitted yesterday, will not reduce non-point source pollutant loads to an extent that will not have an adverse impact on wetlands or watercourses. We have Hopbrook down gradient, which is a cold water fisheries stream. You've got several aspects that are problematic on a cold water fishery stream. As proposed, the detention basins, the two of them now, will have a 1-foot ponded surface within them based on the outlet pipe. The basin is open to the sunlight, so that water sitting in there will bake during the summer. And when new water comes in, that hot water sitting in there is then pushed out into your receiving systems. It doesn't take very much to raise the background elevation in a cold water fishery stream to the point that it adversely affects trout. We saw this with a actually large ground-mounted solar array in East Lyme, Connecticut, where the discharge from the array site, which was a 30-acre array, basically pretty small, raised the temperature 1.5 degrees in a fairly sizable brook versus the temperature up gradient of the stream from the solar array. So it has a pretty significant impact. Metals and hydrocarbons, and George Sigurn can probably follow up with this, but can be very toxic at very low concentrations. Why our DEP guidance does not address metals and hydrocarbons is quite honestly beyond me, because they're some of the most toxic compounds from directly connected impervious cover, which is what you have here. You've got the driveways and the roadways all going to the basins. Water quality impacts are an adverse impact on wetlands or watercourse systems because you are changing the water chemistry. And as you change the water chemistry, you affect the ability of species that depend on the aquatic system from living as well as they should in those systems. Remains my professional opinion with expertise in low impact development, which is the focus on water quality and reducing non-point source loads, that the modified design doesn't come anywhere close to reducing non-point source pollutants that will be discharged to the receiving wetlands and streams on this site.
George Logan, for the record, I just obviously want to agree with what Mr. Trinkow said as a wetland and soil scientist. Later on, I might introduce a few more things into the record. I don't want to do it now because we're just answering a question. But what I want to do, because it's incorporated here, is distribute. The last time I was here, I promised that I would give you the results of my surface water quality analysis for Hop Brook. About 300, maybe 400 feet up gradient of, if you look at the site, there's a little tiny weeny portion of the site that actually touches the brook based on their plan. So I'm up gradient from that. So I will give you this and you will see the results. And I'll give one to the, actually two to the applicant. I guess I should keep one.
Thank you.
And just to go to the back of this report, and that's the only thing I want to show you right now, is the Phoenix Environmental Laboratories results. I also have some meter data, which are in the report, but I won't go into that. And one thing you probably know, because you've heard people like myself talk about these things, when you do a surface water quality analysis, if you really want to do a robust one, you do, say, 3 wet and 3 dry period ones. So we did one now in March. But what's interesting about March is because biological activity is down and because it's the end of the winter, usually you get an influx of higher amounts of pollutants in the brook for a period of time, and then biological activity starts taking care of those things. So what you will see here in this data is we tested for cadmium, chromium, copper, zinc, just some indicator of toxic metals, non-detect. They're not there. And then you see the nitrogen species, and the total nitrogen is 0.98. Again, that's pretty low. Phosphorus is 22 micrograms, if you want to translate it that way, and that's within a good range. So you have very good water quality in Hop Brook. So we talked about thermal impacts. Yeah, those can happen. We also talked about the fact that there are nutrients that are soluble and that these systems don't do very well in taking them out. We don't want to rely on the wetlands to do that because obviously there are impacts to the wetlands from attenuating pollutants, even though they can do some polishing, but there's resulting effects because of that. And you have a very high quality cold water fishery. So one of the questions that usually comes up, well, George, isn't the solution to pollution dilution because, you know, you have a very large watershed and a lot of water coming down. So once that maybe some additional pollutants go and hit Hop Brook, forget the wetland for a moment, Hop Brook, will that just dissipate? The concentration will bottom out. The problem is that two things. One, I mentioned that before, that's really an issue. Not an issue a lot of times a year, but it is an issue during low flow periods when base flow is low. So you get that frog choker and brings all these pollutants down to the brook. And so the immediate area at the brook, including the riparian edge, gets hammered. And then, of course, further on, concentrations go down. So, again, in looking at the stormwater management system, I'm not happy with what I see. I think it's now worse than it was before because of the dry extended detention basins. If you really want to take pollutants out, you want to follow the guidelines to the extent possible, obviously, but you want to have both aerobic and anaerobic conditions because you have different suites of microbes to take care of things. You want to have a lot of vegetation, robust vegetation. You want to have wet vegetation. You want to have dry vegetation. You want to have infiltration through bioretention media and all of the above. And then you might get close to not impacting the wetlands in Hop Brook.
I was trying to find this, and you might have said it.
Yes.
So, the laboratory data on page 3 of your report, cadmium, chromium, all that stuff. Are there any bad things there now as a baseline?
No,
So everything is,
it's excellent water quality.
Okay.
I was actually surprised.
okay.
I was expecting to see a little something of the heavy metals. And I was expecting, because of this time of the year, to see a little higher in the nitrogen and phosphorus category, and I was surprised that wasn't the case.
So they're all below,
Yes. Class A water plus.
okay.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I was just reminded to just jump back to one of the questions that on the wildlife. And I mentioned that I was involved in several cases. One of the cases which kind of popped into my mind is the Unistar case. That's in Putnam. I was involved with that. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. And basically, the Supreme Court upheld the denial of the Inland Wetlands Commission because they had requested, among other things, wildlife and floristic inventories, which the applicant refused to give. And so they denied it because in their regulations it said that they had to have a good characterization of the wetland itself, including wildlife and floristic inventory, and that didn't happen. So it's wholly within your purview to be asking for these things.
Okay, this question is for the applicant. Staff has recommended that if the application is approved, a phasing plan is necessary in order to stabilize the property and provide for a planned, phased tree removal and infrastructure installation. Please provide more detail on the sequence of the construction phasing plan and the associated soil and erosion controls that will be in place to protect the wetland areas during construction of the project.
Again, excuse me, Ryan McAvoy with SLR. So in terms of the construction sequence, our plans include a narrative as to the appropriate steps to take before mass earthwork can begin. So in the case of phase 1, as we've shown in our plans, that'll be the areas to the north of the wetland crossing. All siltation basins, sediment traps, diversion swales, and perimeter siltation controls in the form of silt fence and hay bales are to be in place before any mass earthwork begins. And this is so that once soil disturbance starts to occur, that the full suite of protection measures, particularly at the perimeter of the site, are in place. So essentially, you do whatever limited tree clearing is necessary, where necessary. In some cases, that wouldn't be needed because of the meadow condition that exists. But limited tree clearing as needed to establish silt fence hay bale installation and temporary sediment trap and diversion swale installation as well. Then, once those are in place, tree clearing, stumping, soil disturbance can occur, and mass earthwork can commence. So, in our case, phase 1, what we're suggesting in this particular case is that phase 1 be stabilized before phase 2 be constructed. And in this case, what we say by stabilized doesn't mean complete, but that the site's suitably graded and the site conditions are suitably protected, so there's not an opportunity for significant erosion to occur. In other words, the land is suitably graded, it's vegetated where necessary, and that the road is, particularly road base and binder course are installed. Then, at that point, phase 2 can commence with a similar phasing approach, so that siltation controls are in place, temporary sediment basins are in place, sediment traps rather, diversion berms, things of that nature are in place before mass earthwork can begin. So our phasing approach is very straightforward. The project broken up almost into 2 components. First phase being north of the brook, second phase being south of the crossing. So in this particular case, again, phase 1, north, site perimeter controls installed, mass earthwork, site construction, road grading, things of that nature. Then unit construction, once the site is suitably stabilized, and that's something we'd like to keep a little bit of flexibility with your staff in terms of when phase 2 can be opened, because there may be conditions, dry conditions, where some activity in phase 2 can commence before phase 1 is complete. But we would certainly want it to be suitably stabilized before significant activities in phase 2 would commence.
Could you address the stabilization?
Stabilization, yeah. So what I mean by that is in areas where you have the mass earthwork complete, roadside edges, things of that nature, establishing vegetation on slopes behind units where the grading is can occur before unit construction begins. That's what I mean by stabilization, where you have slope embankments, perhaps erosion control blankets in place, and really all that would be left would be the unit construction themselves and the area immediately around the buildings themselves. So when I say stabilized, I mean that the mass earthwork is more or less complete, that any embankments are stabilized, and where construction is not needed and disturbance is not needed around the buildings themselves, that either vegetation is taking hold or erosion blankets as needed would be installed.
And what kind of vegetation?
Lawn, grass,
Grass?
meadow as appropriate per the landscaping plan.
Not, so in all the, so you're going to put grass down and then have to go in and reestablish, because I think on the landscape plan, it was for meadows around the
Right.
farther regions. So that would make it more difficult, I would think.
So what I mean by, what I wouldn't want to see happen is that the whole area be landscaped and then go back in and then construct the
No,
units.
but I was thinking more of a conservation seed mix rather than establishing lawn.
I was using general terms, but where we have slopes behind, let's say behind the units where we're filling on the westerly side of the roads,
Yeah, I just,
that slope behind the units be stabilized and vegetated. That's what I mean by stabilization. With regard to the units themselves, areas around the buildings, the final planting plan of those areas will be per the landscaping plan.
I'll just jump in here. Mike Doherty, licensed landscape architect with SLR Consulting. When Ryan said lawn, I think basically what he was meaning was temporary seeding. So there would be some areas of probably annual rye or something of that nature, just to get a quick blast of vegetation to hold down that area. And then we'd work through the landscaping plan as we discussed last meeting.
just, the lawn made me nervous.
Great. And Megan Raymond, professional wetland scientist for the record. I just want to add one point to the phasing, which is something that we discussed before, which is the engagement and working with our herpetologist, Dennis Quinn, through the phasing process to ensure that the habitats that are focused on throughout the phases are prioritized to minimize impacts to the eastern box turtle during this process. And that pertains to the difference between nesting versus overwintering, et cetera. I'm just letting you know that there'll be additional input into the phasing as the construction rolls out that we would be considering.
So in the areas where the forestry is going to go on, I mean, it's a relatively large area. Would that all be done in one phase?
No, I'm not going to opine on the actual, I think it's laid out how the phases are going. I'm just saying that the habitat types are going to be prioritized within them, and we can provide additional input as to how we would stage that through the course of construction to minimize adverse impacts there. Thank you.
Well, I do have a question. So you didn't want to get into the specific phasing?
Oh, I didn't
But-
mean as it related to beyond the phase 1 and phase 2.
Okay, so you're gonna go and build the road, as I recall in the initial application.
Correct.
You're gonna build the road, cut what you need to get the road in.
Correct. Correct.
And then you'll be building units separately. Will, is that,
That's, yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
so would you clear cut all the trees now and then just put like a conservation mix to stabilize the soil? But, so all the logging will be done at once?
We would want to minimize work within the forested areas we would want to minimize those activities if we have any potential to think that there were overwintering occurring in that area. We don't want to have an incidental impact during that time. So what we would be doing is just providing, getting additional guidance as it related to habitats on site and preferred areas and hotspots and so forth, and then ensure that those impact areas are properly secured. Likely what we do is we provide exclusionary fence during the summertime, and we can pen off those areas within the forest to prevent access back into them. And then by that, in that regard, we would minimize the impact. You know what I'm saying? We'd kind of move as the species could move.
Sure, but I mean, regardless of the turtles, but you want to do all the logging at one time.
That is, I think I'm going to turn it back to.
Or pretty, not like instantly, but
Correct.
as part of the road building process.
That's correct.
You would cut all the trees.
Yes, that is just, again, in accordance with how it's been laid out with the two phases that are depicted on the site plans. Exactly,
Okay.
yes.
I'm not sure if you'd be the right one to answer my other question, but how much of the soil, the topsoil, the nice topsoil is going to be taken away?
Yeah, I'll defer that to Ryan. I have the, thank you.
We don't intend to export topsoil from the site. We do have areas where we're filling behind the units where the topsoil could be thickened up slightly, but the intention is not to have topsoil exported from the property.
So all that nice, the contractor's not going to be drooling over that nice, rich topsoil, and he's not going to take it away?
That's not the plan, no.
Okay. I live a mile from this property.
Yeah.
I have no skin in the game. This is not going to affect me at all. But it was an old dairy pasture, and my dad was very excited. I lived in the house I grew up in. My dad was very excited because of all this nice rich topsoil. And he gets there, and the contractor took it all away. So all my property is nice glacial till.
Well,
so not
yeah.
much. It's hard to. I'm surprised anything grows on it, but the drainage is terrible. So.
Yeah, understood. No, it's certainly the intent to provide a minimum depth of topsoil on the site, but we're not looking to export topsoil from this property. So in some cases, we may end up with a little thicker profile.
I'm Mike Doherty again. Just in past projects for McLean, what we do is write specifications that the topsoil must be stripped, stockpiled on site, and redistributed on site. So we will definitely be keeping the topsoil here and reusing it.
Okay, you mean strip, like getting out of all the sticks and leaves? And
Yeah, we
stuff
pull
like
it off, yep, sift it, and put it back.
that? Okay.
Those are the 5 questions that we had, we wanted to get to at first. And now, if the applicant would like to present the new information and response to the intervenor submissions. Did I miss one? No.
Madam Chair, the only thing I would suggest is it's 8:20 already,
Yeah.
so I would maybe perhaps ask both the applicant and the intervener as part of their presentations to keep a limitation to 15 to 20 minutes or whatever the chair would like, but the clock is going to start going and we haven't even heard from the public yet, so.
Yes, yes. Will it be possible to do it within that timeframe?
Yes, we're pleased to have this opportunity to present the revisions to the plan for the commission. We appreciate the commission's careful separation of the issues here and protect the rights of the landowner as well as the rights of in the general interest of the community in the wetlands. Who's going to lead us, Ryan? Mike. Michael Doherty, our
Thank you. All right. For the record, again, Michael Doherty, licensed landscape architect in the state of Connecticut, representing SLR and the applicant. So I'll be brief. I just would like to go through. Thank you, sir. What is the revised plan that has been submitted for this meeting today? And as you recall, this plan looks similar to what we showed in the last meeting, which was more of a diagram at that time where we were showing the potential for revised building locations as well as other alterations to the plan to meet some of the comments that we've heard and to hone the plan to the betterment of the project. Now this plan is a real plan. It is no longer a diagram. This is a overview plan, but there has been revised grading and utility plans part of the resubmission for this meeting. And so this is a very real plan that McLean is putting forth to continue on through this process. And you can see in the blue the building locations that have been revised, which are the vast majority of them, of the 26 units or building proposed, only 3 have not been revised here. So through the process and to date, we've removed all the buildings from the upland review area, which has reduced the impervious area that was previously within the upland review by 25%. We have also increased the distance of disturbance that was in proximity to Hop Brook, which is in the lower right-hand corner here, from 206 feet to 315 feet with a revised design to the basin that was there, which my colleagues will get into a little bit more. And we've also reduced tree clearing throughout the upland review area by 2.2 acres. So all the green, darker green areas that you can see throughout the project site, where the majority of them fall within upland review areas, have been regraded to reduce that impact and to put those trees back and not affect them. Continuing the entire site, not just in the upland review area, we've reduced the overall tree clearing by 3.5 acres. This results in a total clearing per unit of 0.3 acres. We discussed this at the last meeting, not a typical development for residential units, which are typically above half an acre and larger for clearing per units. In this latest iteration, we're also happy to say that we've increased the preservation of the meadow itself by an additional 1.5 acres. Again, reducing the grading, moving the units that were in proximity to that meadow area. We've, again, as discussed previously, reduced the lawn area to 0.07 acres per unit, another atypical for a development. And we've maintained the layered landscape approach that we went into detail in the last meeting, where we'll be having a very small area of the open lawn, transitioning quickly to meadow, shrub, and forest. In terms of the wetland itself, which you've heard, we've reduced the direct wetland impacts by 2,400 square feet, and we're still maintaining the wetland enhancement areas that are over 1,700 square feet at both of the crossings combined. And with that, I will pass it to Ryan.
Thank you. Again, it's Ryan McAvoy, professional engineer for the record. So I'm going to try to be very brief here. I understand time is of the essence. So this represents our updated watershed map reflecting the changes to the unit configuration, site grading, and basin configuration as well. So as a result of additional soil testing we did about a week and a half ago in the areas of basins 440 on the right-hand side of the sheet, and basin 430 on the left-hand side of the revised stormwater basin configuration. We've changed the elevation of the bottom of the basins. So, for example, in basin 440, we raised the bottom of the basin from elevation 630 to 260 rather to 263, and that's based on additional soil testing. We found groundwater, again, seasonal groundwater at elevation 257.5 and 259. So we've provided 3 feet plus, in fact, 4 feet of separation from the groundwater elevations to the bottom of the basin. And also for basin 430 to the left, the larger of the two, That's on the north side of the wetland crossing. There used to be two ponds there. We called them Basin 430 and 450. Those have been consolidated into one pond. So again, with additional soil testing in this particular area, we found bedrock at an elevation at maximum elevation of 266. So we raised the bottom of the pond from elevation 268 to 269 to provide 3 foot of separation from ledge. And the result of this plan, okay, is that we still provide a decrease in runoff in accordance with your regulations and with the guidance from the 2024 DEP Water Quality Manual. Again, all storm events, major storm events, we provide either matching flows or reducing the rate of runoff. This is a table that was shared with you, I believe, at the previous meeting or the meeting before, with the analysis point D at Hop Brook, which is in the southwest corner of the site. And then, of course, watershed 42, which is a smaller watershed that drains to the rear of some properties on Country Club Road. So once again, our design, as proposed, meets your town requirements and state requirements with regard to reduction of runoff rate. There was also a question regarding earthwork that was proposed, that was sent in by staff. So at the last meeting, I believe Tom Daly from my firm mentioned that the site is essentially balanced. Okay, so what this graphic represents is a cut and fill analysis with areas of blue and fill, areas of red and excavation. So the net impact of our site development is that there's a total of 2,700 cubic yards of net fill needed to construct the site, which, for the number of units proposed and the size and nature of the project, is what we would characterize as a generally balanced site. And that earthwork is generally balanced from phase to phase, although phase 2 does have a requirement of a little bit more fill material. So as part of our phasing plan, what we would have is a bit of an excess by a few thousand cubic yards of material that would need to be transported into phase 2 to help construct that project. But in general, the scope and scale of this project is how I would characterize as a balanced site, particularly for the number of units involved. Excuse me. So this goes to the phasing plan that we talked about a little bit earlier. And I won't dive into that any further, just because that was discussed based on the questions received from the commission. I do want to discuss a little bit in response to the intervener's comments, particularly as it relates to Mr. Trinkus's review letter. We did prepare a response to all of his comments that is submitted for the record, but there's a few items that I think I want to touch on as part of this presentation. The first is the water quality analysis of the site. So when we design these sites, we look at the regulations found in the 2024 DEP Water Quality Manual. And in that manual, there is requirements for required retention volume. And what that means is that's essentially the water quality volume, which you've probably heard in the past in the 2004 DEP Water Quality Manual. So what that is essentially 1.3 inches of runoff from the site, which is mostly going to be runoff from impervious surfaces. And our site, including our 2 detention basins, provide that required retention volume in the form of volume below the outlet elevation of the outlet structure and about 1.2 to 1 foot of storage within the pond itself. And with regard to pollutant loading analysis, there's no requirement in your regulations nor in the deep requirements for a pollutant loading analysis. And I'll quote from Chapter 4. A proposed stormwater management system meets or exceeds annual pollutant load reductions when the required retention volume is retained on site using suitable stormwater retention practices. So the second item I'd like to bring to your attention is the infiltration rate that we use as a basis for our basin design. So again, referring to the Deep Water Quality Manual, Table 10.2, there is options available for using the USDA soil classification as a basis for the infiltration for a basin such as this, which allows for, in the Class A soils, which is the soil classification in the area of our stormwater ponds, infiltration rates between 1.0 inches per hour and 8.3 inches per hour. However, our design uses an infiltration rate of 0.5 inches per hour, or anywhere from half to 1/16 of what would be otherwise allowed in Table 10.2. And the reason is for an infiltration rate where a loam surface is, this is again direct quote from the manual. If a loam surface is proposed for surface infiltration systems, use a design rate of 0.5 inches per hour for the loam surface when considering the most restrictive layer. So what does that mean? The bottom of our basin has a topsoil layer. Okay, that topsoil layer, we're using an infiltration rate of 0.5 inches per hour. Again, if we were using it strictly based on the soil classification for this area, it would be double or up to 16 times that rate. With the soil testing that we've done recently, confirming depths of separation from seasonal high groundwater and also from ledge rock, we believe that suitable capacity exists for infiltration within these soils. So our required retention volume is contained within our basins. Again, that is going to remain in the bottom of the basin and infiltrate into the underlying soils. So based on the DEP Water Quality Manual, we meet or exceed the annual pollutant load reductions. Another item that Mr. Trinkus brought up in his report is that the volume of runoff is something that we needed to analyze for the purpose of this site. Again, that's not exactly accurate. Both Simsbury regulations and the DEP Water Quality Manual do not require analysis of volume, of the total volume of runoff as a basis for stormwater analysis. Another item that Mr. Trinkus brought up is that when analyzing site conditions under proposed conditions, that you take the USDA soil classification, A, B, C, D, and you increase the soil classification from, say, A to B or A to C, depending on if you're filling a certain amount. Now, there's no basis in either anything in Simsbury regulations or in state guidance that directs one to analyze a site condition by increasing or changing the hydrologic soil condition, and particularly in this case when we're using on-site materials to provide the volume of earthwork needed to grade out the site. So that's an assertion made by Mr. Trinkus, which is not found in any relevant guidance document or manuals. Lastly, Mr. Trinkus says that there is prohibition on disturbance of more than 5 acres at one time. Again, that is not found in any relevant guidance documents from the 2024 Water Quality Manual or the Soil Erosion Control Guidelines. There's no prohibition on disturbance of more than 5 acres at any one given time. So there are other items that I don't want to waste time. I know there's other members of my team that need to go in, but I would recommend that you read through our response to Mr. Trinkus's report, and I would assert, in my professional opinion, we're providing for the water quality volume needed based on the guidance provided in the DEP Water Quality Manual, and that our site meets and exceeds all those relevant standards also found in the Town of Simsbury zoning regulations. Thank you.
Can I ask a question here? You said that you're responding to Mr. Trinkus's report, and you said there's no analysis of a volumetric flow required.
That's right. So
that seems very weird to me.
So what we analyze is the rate of runoff. So you're looking at the peak rate of runoff. So when you analyze the site conditions for a 2 through 100-year storm, you're looking at the rate of runoff that leaves the site or gets to a certain receptor on the property. So that is the basis of design for stormwater management in terms of the large storm events. So that's Simsbury requirements. That's the deep guidance, is that you do not exceed the rate of runoff for major storm events.
So it's just the rate, but not the volume.
Correct.
So there's no best practice
No,
for volume.
Well,
and,
in our case, we are providing the volume retention within the water quality volume of the basin. So the lowest 1.2 to 1 foot within the basin will be retained on site and infiltrated in through the natural soil conditions. So that will result in a decrease in volume runoff for small storm events for certain. But again, the guidance and the design criteria for larger storm events is that you do not exceed the rate of runoff.
I had a question. You mentioned that there was additional soil testing which led to the redesign of when was that soil testing done?
I believe March 21st.
Okay, and then the depth to groundwater, we're sort of in a little bit of a drought. The groundwater's a little bit depressed at the moment. So was that?
Yeah. So when we look at the soil conditions, we don't just look at the elevation.
So you look at the
of
redox
groundwater.
conditions.
You look at redoxomorphic conditions, and you look at evidence of high groundwater, and based on our testing results, based on where groundwater was encountered in March 21st, and the soil profile, there wasn't any evidence of any significant change in groundwater elevations.
And, was the soil, this particular type of soil testing done prior to the development of the plan, the initial plan?
There was some soil testing done, but based on back and forth with your town staff, it was recommended that additional tests be performed prior to going to the planning and zoning application. We thought that, we would get that ball rolling.
Thank you,
And it just happened to coincide with some of the comments from interveners as well, so.
thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Megan Raymond, professional wetland scientist, registered soil scientist. I'm just going to flip back to, I was actually going to, the slide that I had in this packet pertained to the feasible and prudent alternatives, but I think we did address that in the comments and the questions. So I'm not going to review that again, but I just want to state that there were a number of feasible and prudent alternatives considered, and we have proposed the most feasible and prudent alternative for the project, which is the box culverts at 6 by 3 with the natural substrate. I want to slide back to the overall, the site plan with this. I think this is a really good plan that illustrates where we are this evening. In addition to the points that Mike had made, there's a couple of areas that I'd like to address with you tonight. Again, where we're focused on with this project area is part of a much larger 112-acre property. And on this property overall, it's about 13 acres of wetlands, about 10% of the site is wetlands. I think we described that before. But where we are located in this particular landscape position is in the lower portion of the site, the southern portion of the site. And the wetlands, there's 4 wetland systems that we're focusing on that comprise about 1.85 acres. Those 1.85 acres relate to about 25 acres actually of upland review area, actually a little bit less than that. I think there's 25 acres of upland review overall on the site. But we're looking at a much smaller, I'm sorry, I'm doing my glasses now, a much smaller area of work. We are working with these reductions. We've reduced the work in the upland review by about 25%, so about 3.6 acres of activity will take place within your upland review, and that's about a little less than, or a little over 10% of the overall upland review on the property, or overall site area. And then within that, we only have about less than an acre of impervious, and that impervious area is specific and solely comprised of the road, of those 2 crossings that are necessary, that have been cited at a position to minimize wetland impacts. So when we look at this holistically, we've seen a lot of very measurable site plan improvements related to regulated activities. And that's something that we like to see on plans like this. We did, SLR, provide a great deal of thought and response to comments from the REMA letter specifically and submitted those in writing. I don't want to spend, just given the hour, a lot of time getting into each one, but there are a couple of points that I would like to, is there's an actual pointer on this as well? Or this is just? Yeah. I just don't want to turn anything off. That doesn't matter. But the one point that I think I'd like to begin with, there's actually three areas of interest that I want to focus on with the intervener comments, and they relate to the potential impact of physical characteristics to wetland 8 as it resulting from modifications to a watershed. They focused in on the cluster of homes. There are 9 homes up on the upper right-hand side of the page in the along the eastern property line that abuts the golf course. And I believe they equated that as a loss of 7 acres of the wetland 8 watershed. They're saying it's completely diverted from wetland 8 because of the position of the stormwater basin. That's actually not the case. Wetland 8 obviously has a much larger watershed than what's shown on the site. I think it's a little bit over 50 acres on the overall to that wetland corridor. But within those 7.85 acres, the only part of our site work that's going to be focused on the basin or sent to the basin would be obviously just the impervious area. So that's less than half of that that focus. So we're not seeing a immediate reduction of a significant watershed size. This is something that we look at very critically when we lay sites out. And it's the benefit of having wetland scientists and engineers in the same building, because we can look at all of these areas as sites are designed and ensure impacts. And obviously, modification of hydrology is something that we look at quite critically. So we're not looking at any large-scale deviation or modification to the watershed to wetland that would result in a physical characteristic change, either a reduction in wetted surface or modification in plant regime, and that's just by numbers. In addition, our stormwater management design is infiltration, so anything that we're seeing that actually gets picked up by the stormwater management system and sent to the basin, which includes storage up to about the 10-year event. So those systems, those storm events less than 2 years that drive our hydrologic cycle are going to be modified and renovated within the basin. That will be infiltrated. So we're not seeing, so all of that will go right back into the ground and then feed the lower portion of wetland 8. So in addition to, so we're not looking at a 7.85 cleave of a watershed to wetland 8. We're seeing small areas of wetland 8 that will be located within the stormwater that will enter the stormwater system, but the types of events that drive our hydrologic cycle will be infiltrated within that basin, and then those events that do exceed the storage capacity of the basin, 10-year and greater, we would expect those are big storm events. Those are times where there's a lot of surface water running, and we're not seeing modifications to the day-to-day characteristics of wetlands given those events, unless there's a significant issue, obviously, with a stream corridor, not the type of hydrology that we're seeing on this site in particular. The other thing I'd like to note was the potential for thermal impacts to Hop Brook. I think this was something that Mr. Trinkus brought up. We don't have, again, given the nature of the basins, the infiltration basins, we're having infiltration as a primary function of the basins. The times that the basin would be exceeded and overflow would be in large storm events where there's a lot of water in the system. And so we're not seeing these plugs of highly concentrated or hot water. This isn't the type of environment that you'd expect to see those conditions given the amount of vegetation and the limited clearing. We're not having areas that are just getting inundated with sunlight, and that would actually be a measurable impact in Hop Brook and a modification to a large-scale fishery. That's not feasible with this size work area and the amount of impervious and just the overall design. The other thing I'd like to point out is just the distance to Hop Brook. We have worked over the course of the project to increase that distance to Hop Brook proper itself, and now we're at greater than 300 feet for our closest point of grading to the mean annual high water line to Hop Brook, and that exceeds the distance between a lot of the homes that actually abut this area that are located in closer proximity to the brook. So we are not having a direct. We certainly have a relationship with the brook as it relates to this site. No, I'm not saying any otherwise, but I'm saying as it relates to the site work, we are maintaining the riparian corridor to Hop Brook. We're not interfering with any of the vegetation along the corridor, and those are the types of features that might lead to changes in thermodynamics and thermal changes in the watercourse itself. There's a lot more to discuss, I'm sure, but I'm going to pause now, and I'm happy to answer questions. And at this point, the applicant's presentation is going to close, or just pause. I'm not going to say close. Pause, and we will leave it to the chair as to how to direct the remainder of the discourse. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to go to the? Would you like to take a break? We can. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, recess, and we will adjourn again or commence again. And
good evening. My name is John Parks. I'm a land use attorney. My office is in Enfield, Connecticut. I was initially contacted by one of the interveners who asked me to look at the record in this case and the application and to give an opinion. And I did look at the record and I did look at the application. And in fact, I prepared a document and I'm prepared to hand it out to, I have one for each board member and one for the attorney for the applicant.
Thank you, sir.
So what's being handed out is a document that I prepared, and it's called a compliance with regulation. And what I did is I looked at your entire regulation, and you'll see that in black ink in what was handed to you. And then after looking at the record as to provisions that were not in compliance, I made notations in red. And so if you look through the regulation, there's some regulations where there's no red, and those are complying according to the record. But for the red ones, there's a lot of issues with this. And this is a large record, so there's basically a lot of red notes, and I'm conscious of the time, so there are many areas of noncompliance, but I'm going to concentrate on a few that I think are important. And because this compliance document is in the record, I'm going to rely on the document for anything that I don't emphasize tonight, because we could be here a long time if I did that. So basically, the commission has already made a determination that the proposed activity has a significant impact, or may have a significant impact on the wetlands. And that's authorized by Section 10.3 of your regulation. And because of that finding, your regulation puts the burden on the applicant to establish that there is no feasible and prudent alternative to this plan, and that's in Section 10.6 of your regulation. And I was pleased that the board asked that question of the applicant prior to this presentation, because essentially what I heard is it would cost too much to do things differently, and what's really going on is units would be lost. So this burden of no feasible and prudent alternative is a difficult burden, because with design modifications, most applications can reduce or eliminate the wetlands impact. To date, the record does not meet that burden on behalf of the applicant. I can't emphasize enough how important this is, because I've attached a couple regulations from a well-known treatise regarding the burden, and it's actually on the last page of your compliance document. And if you turn to that, we can read that together. But basically what it says is finding by the Inland Wetlands Agency that the proposed activity may have a significant impact on wetlands or watercourses. A permit shall not be issued unless the commission finds, on the basis of the record, that a feasible and prudent alternative does not exist. It's not in your record. Feasible and prudent alternatives do exist, and we haven't seen that, and that's a requirement. It's not optional for the applicant. They must do that. So they're maximizing the number of units, and they've decided that these wetlands will be impacted, but they don't have to be impacted. That's just a decision that the applicant made. And this is a big issue for the commission, because the regulation doesn't lift that burden from the applicant because there's cost or because they want to get the maximum amount of units. That burden is there. And all of the other issues raised in that compliance document accumulate on top of that burden and due to the significant impact finding. So that was a big finding that you made. And one of the things that flowed from that, if we look at section 7.6, we see that when a proposed activity involves a significant impact, additional information based on the nature and the anticipated effects of the activity, including but not limited to the following, are required. And if we look down to D, we see a description of the ecological community and the functions of the wetlands and watercourses involved with the application and the effects of the proposed activity on these communities and wetlands functions, i.e. biological assessment. Where is it? It's required. These regulations, it's not optional, just like the prudent and feasible and prudent alternative, required. Biological assessment, required. It's not there. So by finding that there's a significant activity or potential for a significant activity, your regulation has requirements that are not in this record. And if the requirements are not in this record is incomplete. If this record is incomplete, you can't approve an incomplete record. And I understand this is the third hearing now. And what reading and applying your regulation will do is it will show that this site is too environmentally sensitive to allow the scope of this activity, because there are alternatives. There is no biological assessment. If you look through the red ink in what I just gave you, there are dozens of other issues with this that all pile onto this. The applicant has to comply with all of your regulation. You can't cherry pick it and not give a feasible and prudent alternative because you're trying to save money, or not give a biological assessment because you either don't want to or don't like what you might find. It's required. And you're duty bound to enforce or apply these regulations to every application before you. This application is deficient as it currently exists. Can't approve it. Thank you.
Steve Trinkus, professional engineer representing the applicant. While I did read the SLR response, many of their statements regarding my comments are quite honestly in error. If you look at Chapter 4 of the 24 DEP Stormwater Quality Manual, page 51, it talks about a pollutant loading analysis. Page 57, it talks about what was formerly known as the channel protection volume of reducing the post-development peak rate for the 2-year storm to 50% of the pre-development peak rate for the 2-year storm. In the 04 manual, that was called the channel protection volume. So there is volumetric control in the manual. It may not be phrased as such, but it's in there. The use of Rawls rates, as I pointed out last time, are from 1982. They are generalized infiltration rates across the entire U.S. So they're not specific to Simsbury or Connecticut. They could be applicable in Wyoming, Montana, California, you name it. They're generalized rates. What the manual also further says, which the applicant did not cite, is that the manual clearly states that Rawls rates may be used for a preliminary assessment of site characteristics, but field infiltration testing is required for design. We have no field infiltration testing. So the claim of infiltration in a dry basin the basin designs are anywhere between 1 and 5 feet below existing grade. On the low side, they're about a foot below grade. On the upper side of the basins, because the slope is going up, they're about 5 foot below grade. Based on the soil summary that the applicant provided this afternoon, or at least I got this afternoon, glacial till in these basins, the two that were combined, which I guess is now basin 430, I believe, the test pits show glacial till between 2.5 and 5 feet. So the bottom of this basin, for the most part, is within the glacial till layer. The other basin on the far side of the wetlands, glacial till is between 3 and 5.5 feet. So some of it's in the till, some of it is just above the till layer. Infiltration testing must be done at or below the bottom of a practice. But if these are dry detention ponds, they are not designed to infiltrate in any shape or form. The applicant also further stated that, well, we're providing the retention volume, which is also known as the water quality volume, in the bottom of these basins. As I believe I pointed out last time, simply providing the volume does not equate to treatment. And there is actually a footnote in the manual in that section that says it is assumed that if you provide this volume, you'll get pollutant renovation. The word assumed in civil engineering technology, in my professional opinion, shouldn't be used. You can't assume anything in design. You have to prove it with fact, and that has not been done in this particular case. Providing a volume is like filling up your bathtub 6 inches or filling it up a foot. Do you get any cleaner? No, it's more water, but you don't get cleaner. There are many processes to reduce pollutants. Sedimentate or settling by slow velocities where coarse sediment settles out. Uptake of nutrients, both in soluble and particulate form by vegetation. Trapping of metals. And other properties. There's a host of chemical, biological, and physical properties to remove the pollutants. So simply providing a volume in basically a dry hole in the ground does not equate to treatment in any shape or form. Based on my experience in LID and presenting at conferences and going out to see people that are quite honestly much smarter than I am in the academic world, that's not how it works in the real world. You have to do these analyses to prove that you're going to address water quality. Regarding the soil summary here, I was hopeful when I heard they were digging new holes out there was to see actual soil logs where you see the depth of topsoil, you see what type of loam layer you have, the type of glacial till and or hardpan. The summary data tells me literally nothing about the soils on the site except to the depths of glacial till and or groundwater. Regarding the wetland crossings, we heard the applicant talk about different alternatives. Well, when they talked about bottomless culverts, I think they were saying that, well, they're going to have to put footings within the wetlands. Well, if you do a bottomless culvert and you span the wetlands, the footings are in the upland area outside the wetlands. So there is no disturbance to a wetland. There are also many types of pre-made bridges. There are steel bridges that you can put 2 abutments in the upland area. They will bring the bridge in one piece and they'll set it, and you span the system. As far as utilities, I have done a bridge where we actually had a water line hanging off the bottom side of the bridge. It was a 2-inch water line sleeved in a 6-inch pipe that foam insulation was blown into to prevent it from freezing. And that was done 25 years ago, and it's never froze in New England winters. Similarly, a sanitary line, because it has a slope, could be done the same way. Utilities also can be done by directional boring, where you bore from one side underneath the wetland system and you come up the other side. So there are plenty of alternatives to install utilities with a culvert that does not impact the wetlands. Regarding a box culvert as currently proposed, all box culverts have what they call a cutoff wall on the uphill side of the culvert. This is a concrete wall that goes down 3 to 4 feet below the bottom of the box culvert to prevent water from coming underneath it and preventing the gravel area from potentially washing out. It is a standard aspect of every box culvert. Every manufacturer, when you ask for shop drawings, will give you a detail of the cutoff wall. So there will be a trench through the wetlands in order to put in the cutoff wall. You are going to remove at least a foot of gravel to bed the pipe, the box culvert in stone. Regarding the modular block retaining wall, yes, typically Ryan's correct, you made 6 inches, 8 inches of gravel underneath it, but that's predicated on having a bearing soil underneath the gravel. Most wetland soils, at least the shallow a foot down, are not bearing soils that have adequate capacity to support the weight of the wall. The geogrids are designed to, with friction to prevent the wall from falling over. They don't provide, support of the wall itself. They simply prevent it from overturning from the outside. Years ago, when I first started in the late 70s doing this type of work, there were what was called reinforced earth walls. These were big, fairly large concrete panels with geogrid, where if you saw elevated highways, you had walls on both sides, and the geogrids came across and connected, and basically the friction of the soil kept the walls and therefore the interstate systems, vertically. So the geogrids are designed to hold the walls vertically. They don't do anything for the bearing capacity underneath. So I believe there will be more impacts than being represented because of the need to have a bearing material underneath the modular block walls. But clearly there are many options to span these wetland corridors, without touching them. It's also been the policy of Connecticut DEP for a number of years to, span wetland and watercourse systems simply to avoid the direct impacts by piping or culverting them. We had actually a small, what I would consider a ditch in Ridgefield. It was half the width of the podium here, with a little wetland corridor. And the Wetland Commission in Ridgefield, we had to do a bottomless culvert and span the wetlands. The footings were 3 feet outside the edge of the wetlands with a box culvert, and we left the ditch alone. In my professional opinion, a pipe would have been less disturbance, but that's what they wanted, and my client agreed to it. But there's many options to eliminate the direct wetland impacts to this. The cost considerations, in my experience, again, having also sat on the Southbury board for 3 years, the Wetlands Commission there in the mid-2000s, cost doesn't come into the feasible and prudent alternative, or time to construct. But if you are designing a culvert that is spanning the wetlands, then you're not in the wetlands. You can work from one side and then you can work to the other side. But again, the cost is not a consideration in my professional opinion regarding feasible and prudent alternatives. Just a couple more comments. I hit the Rawls rates. So, again, the other thing that I found once we knew that these basins were now extended dry detention basins was looking up that particular practice in the 24 manual. In dry detention basins, the outlet pipe is to be at the bottom of the basin so that they dewater fully within 48 hours after a rainstorm. As proposed, the applicant is having a foot of water in these basins. So the claim that they comply with the DEP manual is false right on that basis because their pipe is ponding water. But you're not going to get infiltration into these basins. These are simply holding basins. When we started doing peak rate attenuation in Reading in the early 1980s, that's what it was. It was a dry hole in the ground. The pipe was at the bottom, so you never had a permanent pool. Water came in, ponded slightly, and then went out. But they always dried out between rainstorm events. That's what a dry basin is. It's a quantity controlled basin. It is not a water quality practice, and you can see that in the 24 manual because they place it right in there. It's low for nutrient removal. It's, I think, moderate for sediment removal. But it doesn't do much for water quality. That's the bottom line. So again, I stand fully by my findings in my initial letter. The position I take is it's the applicant's responsibility to prove their design does not have an adverse impact, and we don't have that information to support it. So therefore, it's not my responsibility to tell you that it doesn't meet, but I did earlier that, you know, you're maybe 37% removal of TSS. The goal is 90%. You're not there. That's a simple answer to it. Thank you.
Question. You said the retaining walls that are going to be next to the culvert. What would be a good bearing soil for that? Would it be the
Quite honestly, the glacial till would be a great bearing soil.
Okay.
Because glacial till is solid as a rock.
Yeah.
But, you know, you'd likely hit that under the wetlands, but at what depth, you don't know. But the initial wetland soil, and I'm sure, you know, George can weigh in on that. I mean, most wetland soils are 12 to 18 inches of an organic soil, which, you know, is not it's silty, it's clayey, it is not a bearing material to support weight. Thank you.
Well, here we are again, George Logan for the record. And in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll just touch on a couple of things. And then I'll let you read this little brief report that I've given to you already. One of the things I want to mention, if I haven't mentioned it again, is that ideally, and if this is only if the commission keeps the record open, I would love to have a little more time. Yesterday was no good for me. We had a large submission due at midnight. I made it at 11:04. USCPA is very happy with me. So this day I didn't have much time except to maybe look at a couple of things to provide the water quality sampling results. And I want to talk about two things. I think we're trying not to beat a dead horse to death here, but again, in my professional opinion, there is a lack of substantive description and evaluation and inventory of the site's wetlands. And I keep referring to wetland 8 as being a significant wetland. I did provide, it's 0.65 acres, plus or minus. I did provide a few pictures. I apologize for the quality. Apparently all my toners are on the blink, so they're not talking to each other. Picture number 1 is just a few feet downgraded of where I took the sample for the water, and it's looking southerly. Beautiful, beautiful brook. And then the next 3 pictures are of portions of wetland 8. And what you can see there is that the central portion of this wetland is sort of more open, and you're like, why? The reason it's wetter. So you have obviously a tussock sedge kind of wetland there, and I'm sure if I went there and did an inventory in a few weeks, there'd be a lot of things that I would be able to see. So it's open because trees can't grow there, because they can't germinate and grow because it's wet. So even though the hydrologic regime of wetland 8 is generally in the category of seasonally saturated, this season in this wetland is long. And I would hazard a guess, without digging any holes, that a central portion of this wetland, maybe 40–50%, is actually very poorly drained, and not just poorly drained, with good vegetative diversity. Now, I think that one of the first comments that I made when I got up here and answered to one of the questions regarding erosion sedimentation control was that you have soils that have a high fraction of fines. Well, till soils do have that. So when you get down into the till, obviously there's a lot of silt there. But I noticed that you're going to say, well, my colleague here, Megan, said that it's sandy soils. Yeah, okay, there are probably a lot of sandy soils on the property, but in her wetlands report, she listed Ludlow silt loam, Rainbow silt loam, Wethersfield loam, Raypole silt loam, and Wilbraham silt loam. So I guess I got a little bit confused there. At any rate, one of the things that we've been harping on is, again, that there has been a good function and value analysis on this property. And I'll just focus on one, and that is wildlife habitat. And mind you, The descriptive approach that we use doesn't say wetland-dependent wildlife, although it might be in the description that I'll read in a moment. It says just wildlife habitat. And I'll just read it directly from the manual that basically explains this particular. So it says wildlife habitat. This function considers the effectiveness of the wetland to provide habitat for various types and populations of animals, typically associated with wetlands and wetland edge. Both resident and/or migrating species must be considered. Species list of observed and potential animals should be included in the wetland assessment report. Didn't happen. And then there are a bunch of considerations and qualifiers, and I won't go into them. But that's how we define is whether a wetland function of value is principal or present or secondary or not there at all. So we never saw the qualifiers assessed. Okay, enough of that. Now, the next thing and the final thing that I want to talk about this time, and if time permits, if there is another time, we'll talk a little bit more about other things. But in the back of your report, you have this little colorful looking, which is similar to what I had done the previous time. It just has a few different colors, and it's the newer map, so I had to redo it. And I know Megan came up here and spoke and said that the reduction of 9.48 acres of watershed to wetland 8 doesn't really cause a problem. And I understand that from what reading that there is an increase actually of the overall watershed to wetland 8 by 5%. But that is coming from far reaches of the watershed as a whole, and it's more or less through flow. There's a watercourse that goes through here. So obviously there's a lot of through flow that goes through because these are, there's a gradient from the top to the bottom. My concern is what happens, how does this seasonally saturated regime become so? And in their own functions and values, the only function and value that they consider principal for this particular wetland, yes, groundwater discharge recharge. Okay, so that's a good start. We know that this wetland relies on groundwater recharge and discharge. Recharge within its watershed, discharge within the edges of the wetland and into the wetland itself. And so I'm showing there that there is at least 7.6 acres of wetlands of watershed 44, which is the proposed conditions, is basically taking water away from infiltration, although there will be some infiltration, obviously. But a lot of these units are very close together, and they shed to the road, and the road obviously sheds to the basin, and the basin basically circumvents and discharges at the bottom end. Now, someone would say, well, there's going to be infiltration in the basin, which again, we haven't proven. But if you look at the contours and you know that the till and the surface level more or less match themselves, then you can look at the groundwater and you can see that even if some water did infiltrate through the basin, then a majority of it is going away from the wetland. And then we have some on the other side also, which is not as significant, but obviously it's a part of the whole thing. So what's in my mind, if they were to say more than just words and prove that this is not the case, because within this watershed we have curved numbers that are changing and so on. We have steeper slopes in some areas which shed water down to the drainage system and then out. I would do a water budget analysis to prove that I'm wrong. Because if they don't do it, then I will say that in my professional opinion, this wetland will be denied water, which is a significant physical impact, and that has a cascade effect on functions and values in the actual wetland. So, all right, so if I'm right, which I believe I am, this prolonged seasonally saturated regime and with areas of very poorly drained soils in that open area, which you saw in those pictures, will become drier. And so what will happen is it will close in with woody vegetation. And unfortunately, because of the fact that at the edges of this system we have multiflora rose, we have morose honeysuckle, we have Japanese barberry, other invasive species, they will close in, and this wetland will turn to look more like wetland above it, or the one above that, which is basically a sea of invasive species. And this is a special wetland. And because it's a special wetland, it is also used by our box turtles, which rely on it also for hibernation, most likely for foraging, for getting their slugs and their invertebrates from this moisture regime. So if this is the case, then this wetland is going to go low in function. It's going to blink out and not do what it's doing today. So if we want to know for sure whether or not this is the case, we would do a water budget analysis. And I guess I will leave it at that. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Yes, so does changing the topography of this area, the phase 2 area, because they're basically taking off some of the higher areas and they're filling things in, does that change the water flow at all, or is the water flow all dictated at a lower level?
Yeah, so there's pluses and minuses. So when you remove the trees, right, there's more water that's going to run off and or infiltrate, but it will depend on, your characteristics of your watershed and of your slopes and how the internal mechanisms of the watershed works. So they have flat areas and so slightly concave that will take this rainwater and allow it to infiltrate and get down. Great. The other thing that happens that I think Mr. Trinko spoke about the last time is that, and many times these kinds of situations, because of the working of all the areas, these soils become a little more compacted, so they don't infiltrate as readily, unless you plan for it.
On your chart here with the colors,
Yes.
you have a bunch of contour lines. So does the contours, so when you get on the other side of the wetlands, all those units, those 9 units or 11 units, are they level?
No.
Like
I
in
mean,
the
you
same
can
level?
you can see that there's some internal grading that's happening there. None of them are level because the land is not level.
Okay.
They're trying to level it as much as possible, obviously. So if you look to the up, which is east, you see that there is a cut there, obviously, trying to level it. And then on the other side, there is a fill. Most likely that you can see all those contours that are bunched together right above WS40. And so there are also internal contours. So there's slopiness here, but what happens is because you have this roadway circuit, a lot of this water sheds into the road and then it's caught up with the catch basin system, and then it's rerouted to basin 340. Can't read it. So yeah, I mean, I haven't done an internal analysis of how everything's going on, but I suspect that the applicant could, if he so desired, do a more lengthy and detailed water budget analysis, looking at an annual budget, and there's methodologies to do that, and I'm not here to point out which ones those are, and so we can figure out if we are going to have a reduction. Now, there might be a reduction, and they might say, well, the reduction is only 10%. Is that significant? And then we can talk about it. But in my mind, there will be a reduction. And any reduction that's substantial will have an impact, physical impact on this wetland, and again, the cascade ecological impacts that are associated with getting rid of the most significant portion of a wetland, which is its hydrology, which supports the vegetation, which supports animal life, etc.
So I have another question.
Sure.
Is it a correct interpretation that if you could figure out a way to take the water that is coming from the impervious surfaces and locally re-injected at the site instead of concentrating in one place. Would that be intrinsically better?
Uh-huh,
Yes?
yes.
Okay.
Again, here's the thing. We're not here to tell them how to design it. All we're saying that it, based on this particular design, which doesn't really take a lot of low-impact development into the equation, my professional opinion is there's going to be a hydrological impact to this wetland. Can you redesign it? Well, if yes, maybe, show it. But that's just one factor. And there are obviously other factors. I'm just showing you one thing that's, in my mind, a clear physical impact. Now, if you ask me for feasible prudent alternatives, I'd say have one crossing or just stop short of the wetland corridor and do something that doesn't come close to wetland 8. But again, that's not for me to tell them what to do. It's for them to prove that their impacts are not adverse. You're welcome. Thank you.
Right. So we now on to applicant rebuttal.
So
Unless
it's up
we
to you,
have any
madam,
other
whether
questions.
whether to go back to the applicant or open it up for impact. Maybe it's better to, it might be better because the applicant's
for-
going to have an opportunity to rebut public comment as well. So I would suggest
All right.
going
We'll
to your
switch
public
the order.
comment at this time. I
All
think
right.
it makes sense. These folks have been sitting here
Thank you.
quite some time. I would ask maybe first if there are any other interveners who want to speak, since there are 9 identified interveners. If they plan to offer public comment, they ought to do it under the intervener's time.
All right. Are there any other? All right. Thank you.
I mean, the interveners don't have to speak, but I would give them the opportunity now.
Well, we had considered doing as part of public comment to make sure that public had enough time to get their comments in. So that was, we were trying to allow for that, but I will
Well,
gladly speak
well,
now if that was,
That would be
if that's
good.
better.
I mean, if it's part of public comment, that's where we are now, so
Okay.
go for it, sure.
All right, and Brittany, if you can have photo 1 ready. Good evening, my name is Jessica Franks. I am an intervener. Here's a photo of the meadow, some of the meadow, and the forest that we are here to discuss. Photo 2. Yep, just photo 2. But if this plan goes through, this is what the next few years will actually look like. Pardon the terrible Photoshop. I spent most of my week filing a report with Deep about the box turtles, and you have that as well. So this is what you get. I will point out that I tried to match the clearing. The clearing of the woods is primarily off to the left, so it's not in there, and it's primarily behind that patch of trees to the right. The bit of woods that I left in there are where the wetlands, they're just small patches of woods that are remaining in the wetlands. Photo 3. So upon completion, with 12 football fields worth of trees cleared. Let me say that again, 12 football fields worth of trees, and around 3 football fields worth of meadow covered, it could look something like this. Obviously, these are quick copy and pastes again, but they are approximately where these homes would go from this photo. Now, this alone, to me, is terrible, but it's not the kicker. Photo 4. Let's go back to that original photo. If you Google McLean Simsbury, a sponsored link is the top result, and it sends you here to mcleancare.org. Photo 5, please. I'm not sure if you can see, that photo is from their website. This is not an April Fool's joke where I like redesigned their website or something. Do you notice this photo? McLean themselves thinks this meadow is so beautiful that it is literally the background of their marketing landing page. Let me end with this. We interveners care so much about our seniors that when they are being sold a glossy future, we will make sure they know what will actually be destroyed in the process. Because the seniors I know would care about that very much. They don't believe that the only way they can have a home is to pave paradise. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alyssa Peterson. I happily grew up in Simsbury and attended its schools. My family still resides here, but I live in Hartford. I appreciate being allowed to briefly address this commission. In our capital city, our council and commission policy has been to allow non-residents to speak because they often work in its buildings, go to sporting or concert events, or visit our doctors and hospitals. However, I believe I have actual standing to place my comments into the commission record as a member of the public. I am concerned that the applicants do not have the authority to ask the town of Simsbury to grant them permits to use the land as proposed, which land is held in a public charitable trust. And to be clear, having the authority to act versus having standing are different. George McLean was a farm boy who loved his family's land and whose aunt paid for his brand new home at Holly Hill and who later left him his wealth. When he died, now Senator McLean gave back her wealth and money he had earned and invested to what was called the McLean Fund. 60 years ago, a Hartford Superior Court found the perpetual trust he created served both public and charitable interests. Its clear purpose was to create and maintain the McLean Game Refuge and care for women in particular, whether they were in their home or in a convalescent home or hospital that he wanted built after the trust accumulated a certain amount. The court denied trust members' costly plan at the time and had them scale back efforts. In reading that court decision and numerous articles in the Hartford Current archive that span 100 years, the dual public purpose of the trust is repeated over and over. Quotes from Senator McLean's will showed that he wanted to care for worthy and indigent, infirm, or incurable mothers as the first class provided for, with widows or single women as the second class. And when all selected members of these two classes are cared for, such other worthy and indigent, infirm, or incurable persons that the trustees in their discretion may select and approve. In today's lingo, the ill or infirm probably include the mentally and physically handicapped. Recipients also had to be residents of the state, and they may be cared for wherever they were living, meaning off-site services. And while the will did allow for additions to the future McLean home or hospital, I submit that in no way did the humble senator who loved his family farm ever envision the monstrosity of a luxury apartment complex abutting a private golf course or the 50-plus luxury homes proposed before you that consume amounts of his family farm acreage equal to the size of the current complex. Also, the luxury life plan requiring substantial assets for entry and living at McLean Home, or the very limited type of patients they now only accept for orthopedic rehab, were also not envisioned by the senator. So as a member of the general public for whom the farm and trust was left, I submit that the proposed application for use of the land before you does not meet the intent of the will. And as I have expressed to some of the interveners, it is time for the town of Simsbury or your state representative or just one of these interveners to request an opinion of the Connecticut Attorney General and his Charitable Trust Department. Such a request is absolutely within his statutory duty. It appears that the convalescent home aspect of the trust was fulfilled long ago, as were building add-ons. It's time to re-examine if the remaining farmland must be left alone and for the trust that was worth $60 million 3 years ago should shift exclusively to the care of those identified in the will, either at McLean Home or in their own home, and for the maintenance of existing buildings in game refuge separately. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Pico, and I live at 6 Teachers Turn in Simsbury. And I want to thank you and the committee for giving us this opportunity to comment on the application. Simsbury is often considered to be the first western frontier over the mountain from the Connecticut River Valley. Early settlers came from Windsor seeking land and employment in the pitch and tar manufactory, supported by the abundant pine forests which covered the area. One of the first things they noticed was something the Masako tribe had known for centuries. The sky in this area was exceptionally dark. Some of Simsbury's earliest inhabitants, from the Masako tribe to town historian Lucius Barber, regularly commented on the darkness of Simsbury's night sky. When the Pequot War reached the town in 1637, most engagements were strategically conducted under the, quote, impossible darkness of Simsbury's night. In the 19th century, downtown Simsbury was home to 15 taverns. Today, only 2 of those remain on Hot Meadow Street, Phelps Tavern and Pettibone Tavern, which is now Abigail's. According to town historian Lucius Barber, who wrote A History of Simsbury, published in 1933, these taverns were built as close to patrons' homes as possible so people would not have to walk far in the dark. Too many patrons, he explained, became lost on their way home, with some even dying on the railroad tracks or drowning in the Farmington River. Simsbury's dark night sky, for better and worse, has been a constant to this area for hundreds of years. Today, you can still see what the Masako, early settlers, and tavern goers experienced just by looking up. If you could pull up the photo. These photos were taken by my son over the last 3 years from our backyard, looking south towards Hop Hollow in the skies above the meadow. These photos are only possible because the low light pollution of Simsbury in the Farmington Valley. Talcott Ridge shields us from the light of Hartford, so residents of Simsbury are able to enjoy dark, starry skies. Large complexes like the proposed addition at McLean posed a threat to this natural beauty with house and street lights, and yes, even the dark sky compliant ones, making stars harder to see. I believe it is in the interest of this committee and all Simsbury residents to vote against this new development, as it poses a threat to one of the oldest qualities of our town that has made it a unique contribution to Connecticut's natural and built landscape for centuries. We all deserve to maintain this element of our town's heritage for us and future generations.
Hello, my name is John Pico. I live at 6 Teachers Turn in Simsbury. I first want to thank the committee for opening up this application to public comment. We all very much appreciate the time you've invested to review and interpret the many reports and presentations that have been put before you over the past few months. Also, I speak to you, my remarks are shared with you in your capacity as the Conservation Commission, as opposed to the Wetlands Agency. And that's because I'm here tonight to again express my concern about this project. I am dismayed at how many of the officials tasked with planning in our town are apparently not going to be satisfied until we rob Simsbury of the very character that has made it such an appealing place to live, to raise a family, and to grow old. The proposed development hurts more Simsbury residents than it helps. It will create more traffic. It will generate more light pollution. It will put more stress on the town's infrastructure. It will disrupt a beautiful ecosystem that's home for many creatures, no doubt driving more bears into surrounding neighborhoods, into our garages, onto our walking trails, making an already troubling and dangerous dynamic even worse. The mere construction of this development, involving the removal of nearly 20 acres of woods, will materially disrupt the environment, creating more drainage issues in an area with homes that already struggle with flooding. It is the residents of Simsbury who will suffer the consequences from this project, which includes all of you on this commission, since you live here as I do. And as for many of the parties representing the applicant or the town employees seeking to accommodate the applicant, I ask you to consider, where do they live? Not in Simsbury. Why are we doing this to ourselves? All for the benefit of 52 people to move into luxury, maintenance-free villas complete with golf course views. This is bad for Simsbury, and if approved, there is no second chance, no do-over. This open space will be gone forever, and that will be the lasting legacy of this commission. Please, don't let that happen. Please do the right thing and vote against this application. By doing so, you'll cement your legacy as the Conservation Commission that actually conserved what is best about Simsbury. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Raymond Hanley. I'm from Westcott Road. This is the first meeting about this that I've been to, but it may have come up. I'm not sure. I just want to check. You guys know your job. But the lower Farmington River had been several years ago designated as a wild and scenic river, federally designated as a wild and scenic river. Hop Brook is a tributary to Farmington River. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm just saying it for the record. Now, Hop Brook enters the Farmington River at the Flower Bridge, the confluence there, I believe. I think, I haven't looked at a map, I think that's about 1.5 miles from the property we're talking about. And bearing in mind a lot of what was said about water temperature and quality, which was said by more learned people than myself. So that's speaking to you as the Wetlands Commission. As the Conservation Commission, a gentleman had mentioned that he didn't have any skin in the game here because he lives 1 mile or so away. And I know that was somewhat flippant. I don't live near any of these people. I don't live near any of the mansions. I don't live in the mansions that are abounding this country that we're talking about. I live up by the little airport. I got skin in this game. My daughter has skin in this game. And these places go away and they don't come back. And I really don't have much more to say than that. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Alex Rose. I'm a Simsbury resident. I live on Shady Lane. If I can orient you on the maps that we were looking at, I think we're usually shown on the bottom. Our properties abut the Hop Brook. So thank you again for the opportunity to comment on this project. This is actually my first time getting involved in one of these town hearings. It's been an educational experience, to say the least. We've all had some late nights together over the past few months. I will say that the proposal I've seen from McLean's underlines to me the importance of the Wetlands Commission. This seems to be exactly the type of project that, without the oversight of this committee, could cause a remarkable degree of destruction and disruption to the neighborhood that I live in. While I welcome the change to the design proposal submitted by McLean's in the past meeting, they still plan to substantially alter the woods, meadows, and wetlands currently on the property to build their village-sized development. According to their own plans, they will remove more than 15 acres worth of trees, which I think someone else commented is several football fields, of trees and absorbent ground cover. They're going to alter existing streamways, vernal pools to allow for road building. They can add several thousand square meters of concrete, asphalt, and other non-porous surfaces. As you've heard from other commenters, this will include a substantial loss of habitat for wildlife. It will cause a notable increase in noise and light pollution, as well as runoff and contamination concerns, as more than 50 households and associated vehicles are wedged into the existing woodlands and wetlands. My principal concern, however, is that at multiple stages already, the applicant has brushed aside serious issues with their plans. With the small amount of oversight performed by the impacted neighborhood families, numerous concerns have already been discovered in these meetings. As someone who lives downhill and unfortunately downstream from the planned village, I am particularly alarmed that McLean's is choosing to direct a large percentage of their water runoff into the Hot Brook. While they have waved away these facts due to the limited contact they have with the brook in terms of their property, my concerns are related to the intensification of drainage into the existing waterways through their property and ours. They have chosen to direct this water into a streamway which joins the brook in an area that is already vulnerable to flooding. Compounding the issue is that the area they are sending their runoff into is immediately upstream of the Cedar Hill Road Bridge. This is a piece of infrastructure which is conveniently not shown on any of their maps, but is there, that already needed town intervention recently after spring flooding in the 3 years that I've lived here, at least a couple of times. Any increase in flooding would easily overwhelm the bridge's culvert and potentially cut off 58 houses from Cedar Hill, Cedar Glen, and the Country Club Road neighborhoods. That's the only way in and out of the neighborhoods right now. I will state my objection plainly. Their drain pipe is my neighborhood. It is where my kids live. It's where we wait for the school bus. It is where we live and drive and work and play every day. There is also pertinent history that intensifies my fears. You heard during comments in the February 18th meeting that McLean's last development resulted in flooding issues for Washburn Road residents. I have anecdotally also heard of flooding on the Hot Meadow Country Club golf course since their last improvement. Much of the water control techniques used in that development are proposed again for this expansion, the difference being that McLean's, having failed once, is doubling down on the scale and complexity in this development. Finally, in their environmental report, McLean's included pictures of the Hot Brook at its lowest ebb, apparently taken during last year's record drought. As someone who lives in the ravine created by the brook, I can tell you that this was an act of outrageous obfuscation, if not outright deception. It has made me question everything else in that report. The characterization of the property within their report is entirely alien to what I see every day from my office that overlooks the Hot Brook. Several of us in the neighborhood have submitted images and videos of the brook at other times of the year. I urge you to review these. You will see direct video and photos of what I am talking about. Before you make your decision, please understand the potential impact of adding a large volume of water to this area. It is important for you to realize that contrary to the pictures included in the wetlands report of the proposal, this is already an extremely dynamic environment. Over the past 3 years, I've seen wildly different levels of water and speed in not just the brook, but its tributary streams as well. There is one that appears on my property on the other side of the brook from them that isn't there 99% of the time. But when it's there, it's there. We've seen flooding, erosion each spring. We see the brook change course each spring, and that is just in normal weather, not even when we have tropical storms or rain events. I shudder to think what would happen to our neighborhood in a 100-year flood event if this irresponsible plan is allowed to move forwards. I have no confidence that McLean's will address these concerns without outside prompting. Incredibly, I actually first heard about the Washburn flooding from the McLean's team themselves in one of the neighborhood sales pitches they organized before submitting to you guys. They simply waved away our concerns and said they paid for the damage. Let me be clear. I don't want their money. I just don't want them to flood my neighborhood. I urge that if you will not stop this development, to at least require their plans be independently assessed and supervised to prevent them from causing greater damage than they already have. Thank you for your time and consideration, and thank you again for staying late tonight.
I'm Andrew Grossman from 17 Hop Hollow. I was not able to be with you at the last meeting. I was really excited to watch the fireworks on video at a later date. When I stood before you a couple of weeks ago, I think one of the things I impressed upon you is that I'm a devoted walker of these woods and a hiker of the Simsbury woods generally. I've logged as many miles in these woods and in the meadow as any human being over the last 18 years. I know where to look for the animals. I know where they lay their eggs. I have been scared by screeching owls and by silver foxes at night. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of photographs of mushrooms growing off of dead trees in the woods. It's such a rich and vibrant place. I can't even tell you how excited I am for you to see the flowers when they come up in a couple of weeks. It's a remarkable place. I'm also deeply devoted to Great Pond. I've walked those woods weekly for 18 years, the 2.1 mile long loop around it. And I've spent hundreds of hours as well hiking along the trails down near the Farmington River behind on the far side of Iron Horse. When you walk the woods in Simsbury the way that I do, one of the things that is easy to see is that it's an entire wetland system that we're part of. And it's a remarkable thing. Hopbrook and the Farmington River are a precious gem that define who we are as a town, and they give us our vibrancy and our sustenance. You understand that the animals, the trees, the plant life, the quiet at night, the dark sky that others talked about are one thing that we are lucky to inhabit, and not different things, they're one thing, that we are lucky to inhabit these grounds. That the animals and the water don't recognize the limits that we place on them with property boundaries. I know I'm not the only person who thinks this. Our whole town is defined wholly by open space. Every survey of residents says this, that we value this, that this is part of who we are. And even in a time when we're all so divided over everything, collectively, we treasure this open land, this imprint in our little corner of the world that people have been making for decades. Officially, the town of Simsbury expresses this through its enlightened and protective regulations, which grant you the authority to choose good development and which charges you with the responsibility to protect our ecological future. Tonight and over the last few weeks, you have heard the facts about McLean's application. Its incompleteness is fact. Its mistakes are fact. That McLean willfully didn't answer key parts of the application is fact. But actually, that's not what I really want to talk about. I could talk about that for hours. I do. I talk about this for hours. What I really want to talk about is vision. I didn't know this about Simsbury when I drove up for the first time 18 years ago. I saw this glorious meadow and the trees in the woods. Simsbury is a special place. It's unique. For over 100 years, Simsbury's been on a journey to create a peaceful and natural home where people and trees and animals would live together in harmony. This is purposeful. It's on purpose. We've done this together. Sorry, my computer. Recently, I've been imagining traveling back in time to host a dinner party. My guests would include George McLean, James Goodwin, Gifford Pinchot, and all of you. It would be an amazing dinner. Could you imagine how surprised Senator McLean and James Goodwin and Secretary Pinchot would be when you described how what Simsbury is like now? That 100 years after they lived, that the people of Simsbury valued what they do and were committed to protecting the open land along with their vision 100 years ago. These people started working on this more than 100 years ago. That they'd see 150-foot pines and grand oaks and vast tracts of maples in areas that were denuded for charcoal or cleared for farmland. That they might run into a bear or a coyote or a bobcat outside, not just on a floor or a wall, which was what their experience was. Or that they'd see a fox with a rabbit in its mouth, or a porcupine roaming unhurried, or skunks digging up turtle eggs. That they see wild turkeys nesting in their fields. that they could fish in Hot Brook and not be poisoned, all of those things would be different for them. That they could see planets and stars at night without smoke in the air. They probably wouldn't believe you, and they would ask you to show them photos. In my imagination, we'd all have our cell phones with us, even though we went back in time. When you told them that after at least 60 years of rejuvenation, of growth, that you were faced with the decision to protect this special place or to have it to be replaced with a well-lit housing development and parking spaces for wealthy people, they would tell you what to do to keep protecting their dream. Simsbury might not get everything right, but the legacy of James Goodwin, George McLean, Gifford Pinchot is alive and well and in your hands. I will take Simsbury any day. I think you do too. A great bard once wrote, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." You have the facts, you have the authority, you are the inheritors of this vision and its successful implementation. And I implore you to use all of your authority in making this decision to reject this application. Thank you.
This is just the regular public section.
Yes.
Susan Messino, 41 Madison Lane. I'm on the Open Space Committee, but I'm here tonight as an individual. Someone just mentioned Gifford Pinchot. I'm also on the Pinchot Institute for Conservation, a national group. I am here tonight actually because I watched part of the last meeting, and I didn't really know much about it until then. And I saw Mr. George Logan, who we actually should credit as one of the major people who helped to save the Ethel Walker Woods nearly 20 years ago. And when I listened to George's testimony from the last meeting, and he talked about all the special things that are here, and the water quality, and the brook trout, and all of these things that we have that are so special and they're irreplaceable, I realized how special this place was because I didn't know anything about it before. So that's why I'm here. I don't live anywhere near it, but this is an unconditionally precious place. There's no way to mitigate the impacts to the special species and the habitats in the water. And focusing on the legal technicalities is just turning a blind eye to this precious thing, which extends far beyond its boundaries. So I am asking the commission to use the limits of your authority to protect this kind of stuff. You've probably seen already that it doesn't really have sufficient protection. And if you're not paying attention, there's no one else to do it. It seems like in this case, it's not going to be that difficult because the application appears to be incomplete. So it would seem that you would need to reject it at this juncture. However, I want to say that the Board of Selectmen recently passed a policy that authorized the Conservation Commission to require the developer to hire independent experts for large projects. I don't remember the exact specs of that policy, but if this project meets the whatever that policy is, I would suggest that when it's rejected, if it comes back, that should be triggered immediately. If it's not rejected, which it seems like it will be because it's incomplete, you should still trigger that immediately. So, and I would say that all parties should agree to the hired experts, and the Conservation Commission should approve of those experts. I also appreciate the comments about the wishes and intent of George McLean. And this arguably violates the wishes and intent of his love of wildlife and nature and habitats to be preserved. And I definitely don't think that he would intend to destroy special places like this to fund elder care, which he also cared about. So in short, your job is really to protect this priceless area, and in general requires just simply rejecting projects that are not compliant, harmful, etc. I'd also like to know, how can people send comments in writing? Because I'm assuming that you're taking comments tonight and also in writing. And when would those be due by? And if they're due at the close of the public hearing, and the public hearing is going to close tonight. I respectfully request that you would say how people can do that before the hearing closes, because I have an email that I'm going to send you. And also, if anyone would like to see the amazing things that we have in this area, we're having episode 1 of Beaver Pond Wildlife Early Spring at the Grange this Friday at 7 p.m. And we have so many special things in this area, and we have a local filmmaker. It's all filmed in Connecticut and Massachusetts. He has a worldwide following, and I'd really love to share that, and people who haven't been to these special places could see it. Thank you.
Are there any additional public comments? All right. So we've received a lot of information tonight that we haven't been able to read. So it will be likely that, we will be continuing the public hearing until the next meeting. So we would need a motion to do so.
Yeah, so as always, I always like to remind you after a public hearing like this, I think fundamental fairness usually allows the applicant to rebut or to provide any additional comment that they would like before you kind of move on.
We changed the order again.
It's been customary as how you run the meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for your attention and your patience. If the spirit of the commission is to continue this until the 17th, we'd reserve a right to give a succinct comment in response at that time.
All right.
Since you have the applicant up there, you would need an affirmative extension of the timeline to whatever our date I said, April 17. So April 17 is a Thursday. It would be a special meeting for this body. It was the only day of the week we could get this room or be at the library, so we chose to do that. It would be April 17. So you would need an affirmative extension from the applicant to that date.
Do we have that?
We'd like to provide that to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. All right. That being so, I would entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to a special meeting on April 17th.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you. And, all right. So that concludes that, but we do have some additional business for tonight? No, good. Thank you. I just turned the page and was horrified. All right. So do I have a motion to...
Everybody can be quiet for just 1 second.
We have to finish the meeting.
Can I have your attention, please? The meeting is still going on.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's the other side. I'm sorry.
I would get a motion to
adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Good. Thank you.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings, and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions. And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth, and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government come together.